Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you can please take a seat, if you can still manage to find a seat, because it seems that the few remaining available seats are disappearing very quickly. So welcome to GRIDTech 2024. This is an event organized by GIE, Eurogas, with technical assistance from ENTSOG. My name is Anne-Sophie Corbeau. I am a global research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy, which is part of Columbia University. And for those who know me, you know that I am basically between Europe and the US, quite an interesting place to be right now. This is the third time that we are having this GRIDTech event, a very important event when we are looking at the role of the gas infrastructure on a long-term basis. And today we are going to look at how a stable, a clear and technology-neutral regulatory framework can basically support the move towards a decarbonized energy system. What we are also going to do is to look at the role of the gas infrastructure. We are going to talk about repurposing the gas infrastructure for hydrogen. We are going to talk a lot about flexibility. We are going to talk about storage. And we are also going to talk about competitiveness, because this is very important. Competitiveness and decarbonization is the title of this year's event. And let's remember the Draghi report, which was published a few months ago, is absolutely essential. We need to decarbonize while keeping Europe competitive in a global framework. Good news is that we have a new European Commission since yesterday. We also have, or are going to have, a new US president on the other side of the Atlantic, and he is going to definitely have implications for the kind of molecules that we may be getting to Europe in the medium term and the long term. Are we going to get more LNG? Are we going to get also low carbon hydrogen or ammonia coming from the United States? That I think a very interesting question that may be answered during today's panel or maybe not. But without waiting too much, it is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Andrea Wechsler, who is member of the European Parliament and also member of the ITRE committee. Andrea, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madame Corbeau. It's a pleasure being here, ladies and gentlemen. A few months ago, I stood at the SEL pipeline in Baden-Württemberg, a pipeline ready for hydrogen transformation, embodying the potential of Europe's energy transformation. And this moment, I understood a truth that we often articulate but seldom see in action. Our existing gas infrastructure is not just a relic of the past, but a cornerstone for our future, a future that marries, as we've just heard, competitiveness with decarbonization. And as we convene here at the GRID 2024 in its third and most critical edition, I want to share why gas grids are not just relevant, but essential for shaping Europe's clean energy narrative. Now, first of all, let's talk about infrastructure, the backbone of competitiveness and innovation. Energy infrastructure is more than pipelines and networks. It's the lifeblood of Europe's economy. It connects industries and citizens to secure, affordable, and increasingly sustainable energy. And in this era of transition, these connections are a catalyst for new markets and new technologies. Hydrogen-ready pipelines, like the one that I visited, the SEL pipeline, demonstrate that repurposing our existing grids can accelerate decarbonization while avoiding costly rebuilds. So these networks are essential for integrating renewable gases like biomethane or hydrogen, creating new corridors that support global hydrogen trade, and enhancing energy security through diversified imports and storage. Yet progress in Europe is very uneven. While some regions, like the one that I visited, innovate, others stagnate. And Europe needs a cohesive cross-border approach supported by initiatives like the European Hydrogen Backbone, we must push the forthcoming GRID action plan to prioritize hydrogen-ready infrastructure and streamline permitting across member states. Now, so the second point is flexibility and resilience, preparing for tomorrow's energy landscape. As renewable energy sources like wind and solar dominate, flexibility and resilience will define the energy systems of our future. Gas grids play a very unique role by offering storage and stability in ways electricity alone cannot. Hydrogen stored during periods of excess renewable production ensures a stable energy supply during low generation periods, both short-term and seasonally. This complements the electrification wave, the action plan that we've just learned in the EU Commission, covering gaps in system reliability and demand peaks. But of course, there's a challenge. Digitalization brings vulnerability. Smart grids, however, will be the backbone of flexibility, yet they must be guarded against cyber risks. The GRID action plan must embed cybersecurity as a core priority, balancing innovation and resilience. And the third point is about molecules and electrons, a symbiotic path to decarbonization. The future is not competition between electricity and gas. It's a partnership. Renewable and low carbon fuels, like hydrogen, bridge sectors that are hard to electrify, heavy industry, long-haul transports, and seasonal storage. Now, the transition from molecules to electrons is also a financial and technical challenge. Adapting existing gas infrastructure for hydrogen safely and efficiently requires significant investment and clear regulations. Projects like the European Hydrogen Backbone must be expedited to align infrastructure with our ambitious climate targets. Ladies and gentlemen, standing at the LCL pipeline earlier this year, I was struck not only by more than its technical ingenuity, I was reminded of what is at stake. Europe stands at a critical crossroad. We can lead the world by building an energy system that is not only clean, but globally competitive. And this leadership demands boldness now at the beginning of the new mandate, a regulatory framework that embraces all technologies contributing to decarbonization, targeted investments that bridge the gap between ambition and implementation, and collaboration across borders and sectors to unlock synergies between electrons and molecules. Our gas grids are more than an infrastructure. They're enablers of Europe's green and competitive future. Let us commit to harnessing their potential, not just for today's challenges, but for tomorrow's opportunities. Together, we can ensure a Europe that's not only sustainable and resilient, but also prosperous and innovative. The time to act is not tomorrow, it's now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, because you have actually made my life much easier by already talking a lot about the first panel, which is going to be about basically repurposing our network for hydrogen in practice. So I am looking for my three panelists and inviting them to join me. I can see two of them, David Gill from ENTSOG and Joost Hooghiem from Gasunie. And looking for Daniel, who is, of course, in front of me. Sorry about that. From Hydrogen Europe. Take whichever seat you want. I'm keeping this one for me. So we have already been talking a lot about hydrogen and infrastructure and how we need to do that, and also the challenges that this operation is going to be facing, because, how are we going to continue to consume natural gas, progressively switch this network towards hydrogen, identify where the hydrogen demand is going to be, knowing that there will be also some imports from hydrogen or other molecules, and also at the same time we need to develop storage. So on paper, that sounds easy, but you guys are also looking at that in practice. I think, Joost, you are neck deep into that, doing that in practice in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So let's start with you, David, because you are representing ENTSOG, who is offering its technical partnership to this conference. How are you looking at this transition, this repurposing of natural gas infrastructure to hydrogen infrastructure? I know quite a few studies have been done in the past.
Indeed. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, to greet my fellow panelists and the audience, of course. My name is David Gil. I work for ENTSOG. I'm the Interoperability subject manager. And I think that indeed molecules, and more specifically gaseous energy sources, will have and will continue to have a very big role in providing not only the energy that is needed, the demand of energy that is needed, but also to provide the flexibility and resilience that the energy system as a whole, so electricity also as well, will be provided with a lot of flexibility and a lot of security of the supply that it needs, coming from gaseous energy sources. So I think that some people here in the room have been following the latest developments, for example, on security of supply, with the Commission's public consultation on what is called the energy, the fitness check on the security of supply of the whole energy system. And I think here is a very good opportunity to show that indeed molecules will bring also this aspect of very important securing the flexibility and the security of supply of the whole energy system. And going to the topic that brings us here today on hydrogen, of course that hydrogen will also keep providing this role to the whole energy system by providing, for example, a solution for storing renewable electricity in the form of molecules. So besides this role of providing the storage that renewable energy electricity needs, it will also provide a way of using electricity, renewable electricity, that would otherwise be curtailed, and I think so this is also a very important role for hydrogen. And indeed, this transition from natural gas to hydrogen is indeed a very important technical priority for ENTSOG and for the TSOs. I think that the European energy framework should acknowledge this role of gaseous energy forms, and I think that a coherent and stable regulatory environment should be provided to allow for the necessary investments and to look beyond into the future.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to turn to Daniel, because Daniel, you work for Hydrogen Europe, so obviously you are looking at hydrogen every day, in particular in Europe, but also worldwide. Why do we need this hydrogen infrastructure, and what is the role? And I think it's also important to mention that you just published, I think a few days ago, your new hydrogen monitoring report, which I have not completely read, but I read the most interesting part for this panel. So please tell us a little bit more about how you are looking at hydrogen, in particular the infrastructure for hydrogen.
Thanks a lot, and also for the invitation to be here. Yes, and we have a new report, Clean Hydrogen Monitor. It's a lot shorter than last year, so I really invite everyone to have a look. It will be a very fun read during the weekend, maybe when you find some time. But I think indeed, before we go into repurposing, why do we have this? Why do we need this hydrogen grid? It's not an obvious everywhere. Yeah. In this report that we just did, we presented that we need to meet our 2030 targets. Yeah, from the Renewables Directive, from aviation, from maritime, and what we found out is that under current conditions, we could be meeting our target more or less is around 2 million tons of hydrogen by 2030. Of course, we need to speed up investments, but we could be there. But what we find out is that in overall, we can probably produce 2 million tons of hydrogen by 2030, but not in the places where we need to have this hydrogen, right? So we'll be producing a lot of hydrogen in Iberia or in the Nordics, but when you need most of the hydrogen today, it's in Germany, in Poland, in the Netherlands and Belgium, and therefore will be difficult to get all that. So there is a clear conclusion, which for many of us here probably is very obvious, but still there is a conclusion that you need the infrastructure to bring the molecules from one place to another. In the meantime, or for some cases, you might decide to turn your molecule into a liquid, being ammonia or methanol, or as a eSAF, and you might be shipping it. But for bulk of the hydrogen demand that we will have in the future, we'll need it in the gaseous form. Yeah? So I think it's important that we work on that infrastructure. Now, we were also in Florence last week. Yeah, we were discussing with the electricity community, and you know, I used to work in the electricity sector before, and I came back home and said, well, same discussion as 4 years ago. Nothing has changed. So they are talking about how to aggregate demand, because heat pumps and electric vehicle charging has a huge potential, but nobody knows how to make money out of that. Yeah, and they are discussing TSO, DSO, who takes the responsibility, who manages the data. The same discussions as before, and they all look into hydrogen. Hydrogen, come to us, tell us how much flexibility you are going to be able to provide to the system. We have congested networks. We have an increasing price of connecting to the grid, and yeah, we need to build a lot of grid, definitely, but it's not coming at the speed that we need. And I say, yeah, but you want flexibility from power to hydrogen, yeah? But then you want to place the electrolyzer exactly where you have your electricity problems, right? And you want to store that energy. And I said, well, we cannot do that today. I mean, we are putting electrolyzer where you have the demand. Yeah, we're putting electrolyzer in the refinery or in the chemical plant, because we don't have a hydrogen infrastructure. Yeah. So if you want us to be able to locate the electrolyzer where you electricity grid want, we need to have a infrastructure. Yeah, at least some transmission infrastructure. And the other thing is about coping for so much variable renewable. If you want us to have that flexibility, we also need the storage infrastructure for hydrogen. So I think this is very important, because as the MEP Wechsler said before, I mean, it's not either or, it's both of them, yeah? But we keep on discussing, it's electricity, it's hydrogen, and so on. And I think you need to go both hand in hand. And so I think the latest report from Acer, which calls for prudency in building hydrogen infrastructure, I think it's a very unfortunate conclusion that they made, yeah? Because I think that it's the opposite that we need. We need to speed up investments, yeah? Maybe another reflection, because everyone say, well, you know, how we do this repurposing? It's very easy. We need to do joint planning. Joint planning. TSOs have to plan jointly, and they have to do with all the stakeholders. It's very easy to say here in Brussels, right? But then they're like, okay, so now we sit down, we plan. What do we plan? What do we repurpose? What do we build? And I think the bottom line at the end of the day is the off-taker. Will we have an off-taker for hydrogen? How much and when, at which price, and so on? And this is what we concluded after 1 week of Hydrogen Week here in Brussels 2 weeks ago. We had 9,000 people in Brussels, and everyone talking about where is the off-taker, what is the off-taker, how much they are willing to pay, and when. So I think one element to help also this joint planning will be, from a government perspective, is, okay, help the off-taker, or say, help the industry to decide what is the decarbonization strategy. Might be natural gas with CCS. It might be turning into biomethane. It might be put in hydrogen, yeah? So maybe work with support mechanisms or revenue stabilization mechanisms, which help them make that choice, being a carbon contrast for difference, for instance. And then if they get the support, the long-term support from the government, and I will not call this necessarily a subsidy, I will call it a support to reduce the investment risk, yeah? Because if the CO2 price goes up, these companies might actually be making more money than relying plainly on natural gas. So if you introduce such a type of mechanism, then it will be, I think, a little bit easier also for the operators to understand where the off-taker is, and then do that joint planning that we very much need, both at national distribution level, but also the transmission level. I leave it there. I have another point, but maybe I bring it later.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I mean, you have already touched many points, and there are a few of them that we are going to talk about later, in particular the points on flexibility and storage that we are going to see again in the third panel. But again, I would like to turn to you, Joost, because I mean, you are looking at that, this reconversion, this repurposing of hydrogen to hydrogen pipeline in practice. I think we have been looking at the Netherlands as one of the leading countries in terms of hydrogen development. You were one of the first countries to have a hydrogen strategy. And so, how is it going in practice? I mean, Daniel has just told us we're looking for off-takers. So, where are the off-takers and how are you linking them to the hydrogen supply? How is it going in the Netherlands?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm Joost Hooghiem. I work for Gasunie. Gasunie is an infrastructure, energy infrastructure company in transformation from natural gas infrastructure, also currently developing infrastructure on CCS, heat, and hydrogen. Within Gasunie, I'm responsible for the rollout of the hydrogen network for our subsidiary High Network Services. We got an assignment from the Dutch government to develop infrastructure to connect the 5 industry clusters in the Netherlands, to connect to Germany, to connect to Belgium, and to connect to the first hydrogen storage that Gasunie is also developing, a salt cavern-based storage for hydrogen. And we already started construction in Rotterdam, so in one of our big industry clusters. But actually, we already started in 2018, because since 2018 we have our first repurposed natural gas pipeline for hydrogen in production between Douw and Jara in the southwestern part of the Netherlands. In the rollout of our network, repurposing of natural gas grids or parts of the natural gas grids is of course really important, since it's more than 4 times cheaper than building new pipelines. And this factor 4 is under pressure currently in a positive way, because we see this factor increasing, so it becomes much more interesting to repurpose natural gas pipelines. So we initially started with 85% of the first version of the network in the Netherlands would consist of natural gas pipelines, and the others parts will be newly built. Gasunie is also active in Germany, also rolling out part of the kernnets there. But how is it going? Well, the construction works and the technological part, that's no longer the issue. So I think the main challenges we are now facing is on planning, and then especially in lead times for permitting. It takes in the Netherlands approximately up to 4 years in a national government coordinated project procedure, like we call it. It takes 4 years to get the permit, and then it takes, depending on the length of the trajectory, between 1 and 2 years for construction. So it's a long time waiting before we can actually start building the infrastructure. So that's the main challenge. So we see our ready for operation dates under pressure, and we had to announce some delays in infrastructure to market parties of approximately 1.5 and 2 years because of these long permitting lead times. Another challenge that we face is, of course, lack of producers and off-takers. Because in Rotterdam we are actually building, because we had a producer, we had an off-taker, and they made a step together with us to develop these first value chains. But since 2022, no final investment decision has been made. So I think there's big challenges for producers and off-takers to become more sustainable. And there's a lot of uncertainty still on hydrogen. So we solved the infrastructure part of the puzzle, but we did not solve everything yet. So that's challenging. And of course, we are connecting our network to become part of the big Northwestern Europe or European hydrogen network. And of course, we see some challenges there, such as harmonization of gas quality, harmonization of pressure regimes, because it must be It must gonna work as a whole, this network, and we still have some challenges over there. And of course, for producers of hydrogen, it's also really important to know what quality can I feed into the network. So, as an introduction.
That's already pretty good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So, I mean, let me come back, to the very beginning. So, I remember one of the first events I moderated about 3 years ago was the Restream study, which was looking at, the different pipelines across Europe and to what extent they can be repurposed to 100% hydrogen to CO2. So now, if you are looking at your country in the Netherlands, and David, feel free to chip in and to tell me about, the more wider European network, which pipelines can be converted to hydrogen. Yes. Absolutely.
Well, I can elaborate maybe a bit on that, because at first we do a desk study and determine if on paper the pipeline is fit for 100% hydrogen.
Based on the information you have about...
And all the studies that we performed, so that's how we decided 85% initially of our network can be refurbished natural gas pipelines. Step 2 is to actually separate the natural gas pipelines from the natural gas grid. And after separation, we clean the pipes and then we inspect the pipes. And that's a really important step. Because we do an inline inspection with an intelligent pick, and we use the EMAT technology to inspect and to search the pipeline for defects of a certain size or bigger. And if these defects are present, the pipeline or that part of the pipeline is not suitable for hydrogen, since these defects can grow within 1 century. So that's the requirement we put on. We want to be able to safely operate this pipeline for the next century with hydrogen. So if the pipeline is free of cracks, we are good. If it contains some of these defects that are too big and could grow in this century, then we replace that part of the pipeline. And then we can put the pipeline in operation. Of course, we replace all valve schemes. Since they are not suitable for hydrogen, we replace them with pipe or with a new valve scheme suitable for hydrogen. So it's actually quite simple process.
Quite simple. David, do you have anything to add from a more maybe European perspective?
Sure. So you mentioned the Restream study. That was a very good initial step in trying to understand, do a first screening of many kilometers of pipelines. I think it was more than 40,000 kilometers of pipelines that were looked at from, as Joost said, from a documentation perspective, if they could be good candidates of a repurposing process. And it was discovered that more than 70% of those pipelines were indeed fit to be repurposed to hydrogen. And one of the other conclusions that I think it was very interesting from that study was that the other 30% should not be removed from possibility to be repurposed, but further studies, further assessments should be needed. So I think it was a very good initial study to bring this knowledge about repurposing, but then there were other studies that I think also brought a lot of the knowledge that are enabling and facilitating this repurposing process. I'm thinking about the project in the UK, the Future Grids project, and I think that this project that our colleagues from National Gas are developing is very interesting because it's actually putting on the ground repurposed assets, pipelines, valves, etc., and trying to understand what is their behavior when being used for not only for 100% hydrogen, but also for blends, but especially more interesting here for the panel today about 100% hydrogen. And the results have been in line with the documentation that we have, with all the standards in place, with all the tests and the other studies that have been put forward. without any issues in terms of, for example, escaping hydrogen through the walls of the pipelines, which I think is a concern for some people. So it was put in practice that it is not the case. For example, other components of the pipelines, like, for example, flanges. Flanges are the bolted parts of the pipelines that join two parts of the pipeline together. It was shown that at a very high level of pressure, more than 100 bar, there is no issue with these parts of the pipelines. And then, of course, there are some other components that might need some special attention, like, for example, chromatographs. These are the parts of the pipelines that measure the quality of gas, in this case, hydrogen. And it was discovered that the ones that are currently being used for gas might not be able to do the same job for hydrogen, so new components might be needed. So I think this is a very interesting project that will go beyond as well, like looking at compressor stations, which is one of the cost drivers of the repurposing of pipelines, that will still keep the numbers, as Joost said, very low, but compressors is one of the concerns about the costs. And in the second part of this study, there is a potential to repurpose even compressor stations with a possible reduction of costs of around 30 billion pounds per compressor unit, which is, if we multiply by the number of compressor units in our networks, it's a huge number that we can save in reusing these assets. Other studies, like in Germany, that were developed, that were the foundation of the process that is already in place in Germany, which is not very different from what Joost explained us for the Netherlands, but it will be key for the upcoming project of the core network in Germany that will connect producers to end users throughout the whole country. That will have more than 9,000 pipelines, and 60% of them will be conversion from natural gas to hydrogen. And so these procedures are key to really put forward this effort of using the pipelines to flow hydrogen.
Okay, so we are sure now there is absolutely no problem in repurposing the hydrogen pipelines. As you've told me, well, we need to look at the compressors. Now it seems that we need to find the off-takers. Right, Daniel? Where are the off-takers? So I think you mentioned 2 million tons of hydrogen demand by 2030. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Where would that demand be located? Is that concentrated near ports? How is it located? Where do we find that demand?
So this is a number coming from a calculation looking at the industry demand by 2030 and then applying this 42% obligation plus the 1% on the refineries. So obviously any refinery across Europe will have to produce some RFNBO.
This is the industrial hydrogen demand, the 42%.
Industrial hydrogen demand, correct.
Okay.
And then when it comes into all the industrial uses, you have mostly ammonia production and methanol, and also other activities in the chemical industry and sometimes for industrial heat. And then the other part is refineries, fuels, and then is the production of e-fuels or eSAF, yeah, where we will probably need around 400,000 to 500,000 tons of hydrogen for the production of these eSAFs, which will happen in different parts of Europe, but they need to be supplied at the airports. Yeah. This is part of the demand. This is what we calculated legally from the targets. Yeah. But I think, as Joost has mentioned, you build one pipeline because you have one off-taker and one producer, so it was kind of a clear case. Yeah? If we want to build a new infrastructure in Europe based on clear cases of private companies making an investment, we'll not want to be having a backbone in 2030, 2035, just to be clear. Yeah? So we need to have a lot more anticipatory investment and a long-term perspective of someone, which in this case should be the Commission and the governments. Yeah? And we also reflect on what the MEP said before. We need to have a resilient system, yeah? And you might interpret resilient different ways. She mentioned cybersecurity, which is a very important aspect. But I would say also we need to be resilient against a lack of supply from gas from outside Europe. That's a way of looking at resilience. And we need to have a power system which is resilient against the lack of wind and solar. when we have high electricity demand. So we have an idea, it's not our idea, but there is an idea which has been proposed, which is to think on strategic reserves for hydrogen, similar to what we do with oil and with gas, where government instructs operators to have a number of days of this fuel reserve in the system, to have something similar for hydrogen. And here, basically, this is not for tomorrow, right? But considering that you need 6-7 years to build all these projects, you were saying, and we will need a few years more to plan all this. I think it's about time to start looking at, okay, how can we be in a resilient system in 2035, 2040, and how can strategic reserves for hydrogen help to do that? In that way, you basically create a new off-taker, which is the government. The government has a capacity to plan long-term, and it sends a very strong signal to the market. They say, okay, we need to develop these storage sites, which, by the way, we have very few which are ready for hydrogen, right? And what we see, that the number of projects happening, and this is very positive, but the timeline is slow, and also the volume is slow. If you look at what it has been submitted for PCIs, and what the latest reports from the industry saying we need in terms of storage capacity, we're doing this and we need this, yeah? So there is not enough signal to the market to develop these sites, yeah? So I think the governments coming in and putting some strategic reserves for hydrogen will be at least one way to enable some off-taker and send some more clarity for the planning and investment side on the storage.
Joost, I don't know whether you want to react to this idea, but I'm quite interested in understanding how can we accelerate this timeline? So you mentioned, it takes about 4 years for the planning, the whole thing, and then 2 years, 1 to 2 years to the construction. But also, taking together the pipeline and the storage that Daniel just mentioned, because both take time.
Yeah, indeed, it takes time, and we are, of course, also from an infrastructure perspective looking at how can we speed up at least the infrastructure part. But on the other hand, I think most important is that we take steps together with producers, with off-takers, to actually get these value chains up and running. I think that's really important, because if we have infrastructure ready and waiting for the market to use it,
this is not good for you.
We are just too early, and with regulated tariffs, the only customer we currently have, and probably some more, will also have to pay for all unused assets in our asset base. So to keep this transport tariff also affordable for the companies that made a step as one of the first parties to actually be connected to the hydrogen network, to actually start producing or off-taking hydrogen, I think that's the challenge we're in. So most times I say we have to be just 1 month earlier than the first party that actually wants to use the network. Well, and we have some cases where our infrastructure is too late, and then we say, well, how can we speed up? And if you see that a big part, initially it was 85% refurbishment. Currently, because of the energy flows in the Netherlands have changed also as a result of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Currently, we have 65% refurbishment, but this refurbished pipeline, in comparison to a new built pipeline, they need the same permitting procedure of 4 years, which is actually quite strange, because that natural gas pipeline is already there. Nowadays, transporting natural gas. Tomorrow we want to transport hydrogen after it has been inspected and qualified for hydrogen, and the valve stations have been replaced. But the question we sometimes have, maybe we can speed up this process for permitting repurposed pipelines, that we need a longer permitting procedure for new build pipelines. Everyone can understand that has some more impact in the in the environment than a repurposed one.
Is that something specific Dutch, or do you see that, and David and Daniel, feel free to react, I mean, is that something cross-European, that it's taking forever, even for repurposed pipelines?
Yeah, we have also have a subsidiary of Gasunie in Germany, and of course we compared with the German counterparts. How long are your lead times for permitting? They approximately have the same lead times for permitting, so also approximately 4 years. But what they do maybe a bit smarter is that they already replaced the valve schemes while using it in natural gas. So they are moving forward some of the construction works, so you can
reduce the timeline for the construction.
Reduce the timeline a bit.
It does help. I mean, there
is one example, a recent example coming from Denmark, where basically the cross-border pipeline between Denmark and Germany has been delayed. And main reason given by the TSO is the permitting challenges. So I guess it's not a single problem in the Netherlands or Germany. Yeah.
And David, do you also see, similar problems all across Europe from your knowledge?
I'm not aware that it's.
But there is a bit of gas.
There are many good cases, indeed. Indeed, permitting is not a simple topic all over Europe.
Has it ever been? I mean, I don't think this is specific to hydrogen. I think if you're looking at electricity, probably the same problem. We are going to talk about storage later, exactly the same issue. I wanted also to touch on something that you mentioned, which is hydrogen quality or purity. Can you both say a little bit more, and Daniel, you can intervene from the customer point of view. I do recall, I think I have told that joke before, but I was a young engineer 25 years ago. I was working not far away from a fuel cell car, and the fuel cell in the car, a PEM, was dead because of carbon monoxide. So this was my first introduction to hydrogen quality and purity. But does it matter for the infrastructure, and how do you basically bring the hydrogen at the quality desired by the customer? David?
Sure. Yeah, you just touched upon that, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. Quality, this is interesting. No, indeed, I think it's very. I think it's something to consider, of course. So if we are talking about natural gas quality, what are we talking about? We are talking about what are the components within natural gas, usually a lot of methane, around 80-something% or more, and other components. And this will dictate what are the parameters that we can measure. You probably heard about WOB index and gross calorific value, very important for natural gas. But my question to the audience is, and I would like you to raise your hand, if you think that quality is also important for hydrogen. Please raise your hand if you think it's also important.
Okay.
Okay, so I think
almost half of the room. That's good.
I think we have a nice perspective about the quality and how important it is. And in fact, indeed, I also agree that hydrogen quality is very important. And when we're talking about hydrogen quality, we're talking about the purity aspect. So how much hydrogen itself, the H2 molecule, is within that flow of hydrogen, and then some other components, some impurities that could come from various sources. So this, I think that for us to speed up the development of the hydrogen system, the standardization and common rules also for hydrogen quality are necessary. And I think that for this we have to look at a whole value chain perspective, because as I mentioned before, these impurities can come from several parts of the value chain, but also the requirements of the end user could be different. As you mentioned,
Absolutely.
The requirements for fuel cells are very different from the requirements from other off-takers, like for example, the industry that would need feedstock as from the hydrogen. And so we need to look at the production perspective and different means of production, different technologies, can bring different purity levels and also different impurities. Also, the pipelines, the repurposed pipelines could bring some impurities to the hydrogen. This is a reality, but indeed, it is also known that with the right cleaning strategies and knowing very well the use of the pipelines before flowing hydrogen, it is also known which kind of impurities can bring to the hydrogen. And it's also very interesting to understand that in some cases, for example, some pipelines that are newer pipelines or were cleaned very recently as natural gas pipelines, they might not need even any other further cleaning processes to be able to deliver the purity that we believe will be flown in the hydrogen system. So we need to look at this perspective. We need to look at the storage perspective as well. It's very important. Storages might need to clean the hydrogen to be able to take it to the grids at the higher purity level. And these cleaning technologies are most of the times costly. And then, of course, the end users. What will the end users need? What is the purity that they will require? Will 98% be enough, or will 99.97, which is the quality usually for fuel cells? And this will determine which kind of purification technologies we will require throughout the value chain, what will be the cost of these purification technologies, and knowing all these indications from the value chain, we can deliver the enough purification units and technologies that are required with the least cost possible. And I think this should be the goal for the whole system, for the whole hydrogen system.
Is that consistent with what you're experiencing, Joost?
Yeah, but of course we need to speed up this process if possible, because next year or latest in the first quarter of 2026, the first parts of our network will become in operation. We are actually selling a service to customers currently, and we don't know what to say on hydrogen quality. So that's challenging. And if you want to build a new hydrogen producing or importing facility, it's important to know what quality you should deliver to be able to feed it into the network, of course. And we did some studies on quality also for repurposed pipelines. And in our opinion, also based on these studies, 99.5% purity for hydrogen is suitable also for repurposed assets. So we collaborated also with some of the European TSOs, and together after this collaboration with the other European TSOs, we decided together with the Dutch government that we publish the quality standard for 99.5% to the market, that we say we think it will be this, but we have to wait for the European harmonization on this quality. But I think, and I agree, that repurposing is, of course, if you repurpose assets, what quality can you reach, also from the beginning of your operations. And of course, the off-takers, it's really important. And you see, of course, different kinds of off-takers. Some really need the high quality or even higher than we can transport with the 99.5 purity, and some can use everything. So maybe
Daniel, you have something to add?
Yeah, I can add something. I mean, I'm personally not very involved on this issue, yeah, but I was in the Madrid Regulatory Forum in this year, Madrid, and what the Germans and the Dutch were also explaining, and what I took from the conversation was like, if you want to set some standards, don't do it in different phases, just fix one quality level and stick to that, so that you don't change the market too often. I think there was also 99.5. I had it by mind 99.8, but it probably doesn't change a lot on this percentage. But I think that was probably the figure which was most used. And yeah, and if some customers need to have higher quality, maybe they will need to do something at their end side because other customers will need less quality. But I think that's something that, I mean, if you look at the current uses of hydrogen today, it's mostly as a feedstock for the chemical industry and so on. So, and they are requiring high levels, not 98, so more like 99.5 or above. Yeah? So I think that
So your
as a strategy, just stick to something and use it, and probably, yeah, Germany and the Netherlands are best placed to, at least maybe with Belgium, to stick to a standard and then push it forward across other countries. Yeah.
But this is something that needs to be discussed at a European level, and we need some harmonization. And by the way, I am absolutely obsessed with statistics, so I want to have, raising your hand, everybody. So low calorific value or high calorific value? How do you measure hydrogen? Low calorific value? Nobody? High calorific value? Okay, guys, you are cheating. You are supposed to answer. Well, I suppose that means that either you have not understood my question and you have already fallen asleep.
You are in Brussels. Eh?
I am in Brussels. Well, okay, I think we have 9 minutes left, so it's time to wake you up, guys, because I think you are not dynamic enough. You are listening a little bit too much. You can ask questions. There should be 2 flying mics somewhere. Yes, I can see one. We have a question over there. In the middle. The mic is coming.
Hello. My
Please
name
state
is
your name. Yes.
Hans van der Vorst of Securos. I have a question for David. Gasunie had an open season in the summer for the hydrogen storage, and I read it was interrupted, and you plan to redo it. Could you please give us an update?
Yes,
Maybe it's for you.
I think the question is for me. Yeah. This process was indeed put on a pause, and I don't have the current planning when they resume the open season, but they are also facing permitting challenges. Since the salt cavern-based hydrogen storage will be developed in the northern part of the Netherlands. The northern part of the Netherlands, if you want to do something in the underground with gas, then it's a quite sensitive matter because of the induced earthquakes by the winning of the gas that we had there going on for decades. So you see that acquiring this permit is really challenging. But to be honest, it's also the market currently is a bit challenging. Yes, we were talking about lack of users of the hydrogen infrastructure in the broadest sense. Of course, developing such a project commercially is also quite challenging. So we paused the open season. We did some extra strategic studies, how to develop the value chain, including the storage. But also for the network I'm developing, we really need storage, since line pack in the beginning will be quite limited. So I also send in a letter to that other subsidiary that I want some priority access to part of the storage capacity they are selling, also for physically operating the network and balancing.
Very interesting. Another question? In the back, over there.
Hi, Eric Raku. Just to continue on that storage thing, because there was also anticipatory investment. Should one actually integrate storage with kind of building out the repurposing of hydrogen a bit earlier? I read a study yesterday, High Delta Public in Netherlands, and it mentioned, I think, by 2050 a figure of 25 storages in the Netherlands. So I'm just quoting a public figure. So, to get to those 25, and, if you scale that to European level, that sounds maybe like 100 storages to develop. So should one also start talking about something like anticipatory investment and technical difficulties around that of storages already today?
Anybody wants?
I recognize, of course, that for flexibility we need a lot of storage of hydrogen, and the technology currently furthest in development is storage in salt caverns, which all investigations showed that we can do it safely and reliably in salt rock formations. But also, if you see where these salt domes are in the Netherlands, for example, or in Germany, where we are also active in a consortium developing storages, we will not be able to develop enough caverns for hydrogen storage to cover for all the demand for strategic reserves, seasonal storage, and also for flex. So we really have to start, I think, investigating how we can safely reuse depleted gas field or other porous rock formations to store hydrogen in larger amounts. I think that's really crucial that we progress on the porous rock formation studies.
And I think we will also talk again about storage in the last panel, just in case people have more questions about storage. Last one? Question over there?
Thank you very much. Arthur from the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition. Daniel, you talked about flexibility that the hydrogen can bring to the electricity system. My question is to David and Joost. Are you guys in touch with the electricity counterparts to evaluate the needs for electricity flexibility and that you guys would bring to them or not? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, indeed, we are in touch with electricity counterparts. So I think they have a clear need for flexibility, and you can see the increasing number of negative prices occurring in Europe. I think it went 12 times higher than the previous year. And Germany, at least in the north of Germany, they ran an auction for flexibility for new assets from batteries, power to heat, and electrolyzers. And they were basically auctioning around 2 gigawatts of flexibility, and they got 0 bids, so nobody participated in the mechanism. We don't have to go into the details of why that happened, but basically the flexibility is not coming at the speed that they were expecting to have. So definitely there is a need for that, and I don't think we should say, well, the electrolyzer is going to provide that flexibility, because it's early to say. Now we need to make a business case flying and so on, but I think if you want to have that flexibility in the system in the long term, you definitely need to build on the infrastructure, both pipelines and the storage sites. So, and now, maybe more on the regulation. There is there was a market design being reviewed last year. There is now a responsibility from governments to do a flexibility needs assessment every 2 years, and ENTSOG is developing the methodology to measure the flexibility needs. Yeah? We discussed it with Acer. And when I say, well, you need to make sure that in your methodology, when you assess your needs, you look into short, medium, and long term. And they say, short and medium, yes. Long term, the seasonal or monthly, that actually is not flexibility. That's adequacy. So adequacy, you need to look at it in the resource adequacy assessment, which is not what they are now focusing. Everyone is focusing on, I have the flexibility needs. So what I'm fearing is going to happen is that the electricity sector say, you know, hydrogen for seasonal storage is very important, but that's an adequacy issue. It's not a flexibility issue. Flexibility is short term. We need to have solutions, and therefore power to hydrogen is interesting because that can help me to modulate the demand, but anything which is hydrogen to power, different day, different story. And I think this is a little bit of a problem, that the power sector say, yes, we need hydrogen, but not too much, not too quickly, and I will make the methodology in a way which is difficult. And so I think there is a need to have more dialogue on that, definitely, for more parties. Yeah.
And involve more Acer. well, indeed. Thank you very much to the three of you, David, Joost, and Daniel. Very interesting panel. I think we have learned a lot, at least from a technical point of view, no problem at all. The permitting is a little bit of an issue. Storage and pipeline have to be taken together, and we need to find the customer and understand what sort of hydrogen quality he is also requiring. So thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first GRIDTech talk, which is supposed to be about the hydrogen German core network, and I'm looking for my speaker. Pardon, sorry. I am not very good with today. I cannot recognize my speaker. Please join me on stage. Very nice to welcome Christoph von der Bussche, Managing Director of GASCADE, Transport GmbH and Gastransport GmbH. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, here it is, the German hydrogen core grid. It was approved by the German regulator on October 22nd, just before the German government broke apart. Well, we don't have anything to do with it. On the other hand, it was quite fortunate that this got through, and now it has a rank of a legal obligation to really install this grid. And to put it the other way around, you would need to change a law if you would want to change the implementation of the hydrogen core grid. And for changing laws, a functioning government is required. So we are quite on the safe side, but it was not an idea of the German hydrogen TSOs somehow to mess around with the government. I think some data are already known, so it's 9,000 kilometers, it's overspanning whole Germany, and it was a quite interesting process in discussing how to set it up, because it was not only the normal process where you look where is future demand, steel mills, big chemical industry, where could be production, well, harbors, electrolyzers, windy areas, but it was more in political, infrastructural discussion as well, being involved. So we started with 1,700 kilometers, and then all kinds of infrastructural, political aspects came into play. So, for example, how much and where do you want to have CHPs, hydrogen-driven CHPs in Germany? Which areas should have connections to the hydrogen grid? Because you can do industrial policy with infrastructure, with energy infrastructure. And so I think it's quite spectacular that it didn't take that long, so only 1 year, and finally we agreed on the setting of the grid. Comparably cheap, with some 20 billion. If you look to the different plannings of the power grid, where you usually are talking about the factor of 10, so 200-300 billion when thinking about extension of the power grid. And it has a very high potential, these 278 terawatt hours of possible energy being transported for which it's designed. Well, currently the gas grid, we are talking about some 800 terawatt hours, or to take it into comparison, about 500 to 600 terawatt hours is the energy, the power consumption of Germany. By the way, the maximum load of the hydrogen grid, the maximum capacity is 100 gigawatt entry capacity compared to 80 gigawatts for the power grid. And hey, so 80 gigawatts power grid, 100 for the hydrogen grid, and this all for 20 billion. That's quite a good deal. We can be fast because already in 2025 we start with the first repurposed pipelines. And repurposing already, we heard in the prior lecture, is good because it makes things a little bit cheaper than new build, and it makes things a little bit faster. Because on the one hand, luckily we don't have so long lead times for repurposed pipelines. So in 2025, now speaking as GASCADE, we are repurposing one of our first large trunk lines. You don't have an additional approval process for that of 3 or 4 years. So you need to prove that your infrastructure is technically capable of performing the job, but then you can use it, and you don't have to go long processes with public acceptance. And I think this is, when constructing new infrastructure these days, the major challenge is it's not the construction, and yes, paying the money definitely is a challenge, but if I look to the power sector, well, they have a lot of people to install it, they spend a lot of money for it. However, the problem is, if you don't have any public acceptance, it easily takes a couple of years before all the protests are somehow solved. Okay, here you see how it will develop. I already told you, whoops. Here in the east, it's the first few hundred kilometers. It's one of our pipelines, as you might guess, formerly used for Russian gas. And that's why we can repurpose it so quickly, because we have quite a few spare capacity and still can transport a lot of natural gas. But at the same time, it starts in the heavy industrial Ruhrgebiet in Germany, and slowly you see some development in the west, in the east, and here in 2029 they are growing together, with finally being planned for 2032, having a overarching German-wide hydrogen grid, the mentioned 9,000 kilometers. And the latest at that time, it's planned to operate it as one entry-exit system. Before, okay, we would like to have one balancing system, but we will start with small islands. They will grow together, and it's nice to think a nationwide balancing system. But if physical infrastructure is not yet ready, then as well you can't have one German-wide balancing system. But the final plan is to have it more or less like the gas system set up from the whole system, from the whole balancing, but for hydrogen. Well, last but not least, financing as well was quite a discussion. We decided for a private financing model, so it's not completely state financed. However, as I think for hardly any of the renewable energy projects, there are only very few solid business cases for it. Here, the coverage of the risk is done by the state. So how does it work? Normally in natural gas, you have the allowed revenue caps divided by the marketed capacity, and so all customers pay the whole revenue caps of the TSOs. In this case, well, with only 1 or 2 customers in the beginning, it would be very expensive. So the regulator will set a fair tariff, and because it's a state authority, the regulator for sure will be able to set this fair tariff. This tariff then is charged, and everything which is missing is added by the state as a kind of loan. It's no real loan, so we can book it accounting-wise, but that's a small but important detail. But in the beginning, the state will inject money. At a later stage, the tariffs will overcompensate the revenue caps, and this money, with interest, has to be paid back to the state. And the big question, which was discussed for quite a long time, was what's going to happen if all these nice plans for 2032 are not going to work out? And there we found a solution that if by 2055, so by far in the future, it turns out that the payments of the customers did not finance the grid, and there's a leftover in the so-called amortization account, that this risk is be borne by the major part by the state by 75%, and by 25% this risk is borne by the TSOs. So there's kind of risk sharing, where the regulator always told us that this risk sharing is necessary, because otherwise the TSOs wouldn't be really motivated to make it a success. And we wouldn't be Germany if we wouldn't have thought about clear, detailed rules. What happens if everything goes wrong between 2039 and 2055, and define on a yearly basis how 0.5% of risk sharing takes place. Well, overall, then it's planned to be as capacity operational wise being handled like the gas grid, as well for the commercial system. So the interest rate will be set by the regulator, will start until 2027 with 6.7% on 40% equity, to a lot of things quite similar to the regulations of the gas grid. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph. We are now going to have a 30 minutes break. Christoph, I think you're staying around, so open to questions during the break. I think it's going to be better that way. So ladies, please come in, because we are going to have our second GRIDTech talk, which is going to be delivered by Luis Ignacio Parada, who is the president of GLE and also EU Energy Policy and Regulation Director at Enagas, and he's going to talk about the role of terminal operators in securing and greening energy for Europe. Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about LNG terminals and their contribution to decarbonization. And of course, I'm aware that you are very familiar with the contribution that pipelines can make. And you've heard many times about the European hydrogen backbone. And today you have also heard about the need for storages for that. But it's less usual to hear about LNG terminals at this stage. And there is a good reason for that, because LNG terminals are still making a huge contribution to gas security of supply. You are seeing how we are adding capacities every year. You are seeing also how we are adding new terminals. Many terminals have been added, FSRUs in particular, in the European Union. And some more are to come. So it's not that usual to think about the role in decarbonization in the future. But we are thinking about that. It's not only LNG operators thinking about decarbonization, it's also the European Commission. So I'm going to talk about a study that we were mandated to produce by the European Commission, and that was in the Gas Madrid Forum, the regulatory forum, official forum from the European Commission, last year. So they asked us to assess and to report on the potential contribution of LNG terminals to import renewable and low-carbon gases in the future. And we did that. We delivered a study this year in June. We presented preliminary results in the Madrid Forum already in May this year, and in the Copenhagen Forum in June. And then we presented the study, the full study, on 26 June 2024 in Brussels. If you want to see the full study, it's available on GIE's website. There is a webinar that was very well conducted by the moderator, Anne-Sophie. And we had there the European Commission, we had Acer, we had many stakeholders that are related, like biogas, ammonia, CCUS associations, and also ports with us. And we had a panel of LNG terminals presenting their decarbonization projects. So you do not only have the study, but also the webinar recorded there. And okay, we presented there the study, and how did we design the study? So we decided to have like 5 different steps. First with a market focus, then a terminal focus, and their conclusions. The first step was about analyzing the market. So we determined and analyzed which are the key drivers in order for importing renewable and low carbon gas and make a contribution to EU targets. Then we analyzed costs of different pathways for those pathways involving maritime imports. We had identified previously, in a previous year, other study that was also mandated by the European Commission, different pathways for the decarbonization of LNG terminals. So this time we analyzed costs, and then we had a terminal focus, determining which are the terminal benefits. So we analyzed and assessed the contribution of the LNG regasification industry to the different pathways, and we assessed those pathways. You can imagine ammonia, liquefied hydrogen, synthetic methane, also CCS. So we analyzed those pathways, and we had finally some conclusions and some recommendations. Okay, we are here back. This is the mandate from the European Commission. This is the study. You can find it on the website. And these are the steps we took in the study that I was describing, finalizing with some policy recommendation for authorities in order to allow for an efficient import of renewable and low carbon gases. And first, we found that terminals are making 6 key contributions, which are here. And I will start with this one, safety net. You're familiar with this one. It's what LNG terminals are already doing. They provide security of supply, backup capacities. The contribution that they have made in the last 2 or 3 years have been massive, so I don't have to explain that, but they can continue doing that with renewable gases. Then another concept, valuable volumes. LNG terminals and terminals in general and moving molecules are able to move large quantities of energy, which is not true for every energy infrastructure, but when you are dealing with molecules, you have that capacity. And we also talk about the concept of building bridges, because LNG terminals are able to access resources which are more efficient wherever they are located in the world. So if the more efficient, most efficient resources or the cheapest way of producing renewable and low carbon molecules is in Chile, in Middle East, in Australia, terminals can access those resources, are not bound to a particular origin. We also refer to waiting in the wings. This is a concept that terminals are already in areas, industrial areas, with access to many facilities that are useful, will be useful in decarbonization. Deep docks, ports, jetties, industrial areas where they can directly supply customers, and they are ready at any moment that when it is required to provide this service to decarbonization. It's interesting that in terms of permitting, we expect this to be faster than, let's say, for linear works when you have to deal with pipelines. And another advantage that is linked to that is that they can green gradually. So you don't have to make a one-off investment in order to repurpose the whole terminal. You can combine molecules in multi-molecule terminals. This means that you can be importing at the same time that you are still dealing with fossil LNG. You can be dealing with renewable ammonia. You can be dealing with e-methane. So you can combine. You can be dealing with CO2 as well. You have synergies between all these molecules, for example, profiting from the cold that is generated in LNG terminals in order to manage the other renewable and low carbon molecules. So this allows terminals to adapt to the path of decarbonization that we will find in the future, and this is providing optionality and flexibility. And last, fit for many. You will see that we have identified a number of decarbonization pathways, and we don't expect one pathway to be imposed over the other ones. We will see different terminals taking different options. So basically, we can divide the pathways that we identified in these groups. You can have a conventional upstream, let's say, and you can decarbonize downstream. This means that you are using the same value chain at least until the regasification plant, and then you combine the regasification plant with CCUS, or you have CCUS in the end use. You can have an upstream greening, producing, for example, hydrogen, or producing bio-LNG, or whatever, and then you have methane in the end use. So you are dealing with methane or whatever, and you are making, in this case, also use of the same regasification terminal, and same, of course, facilities downstream. Or you can have an upstream and downstream greening, having H2 in both, and in the middle you will have a carrier or some conversions. And this is the results we got. This is a matrix summarizing the situation. You see that each pathway is strong and weak in different parts. So here we have a number of criteria. Of course, if you are going for downstream decarbonization, given that you will have a whole value chain that you can still use, this will be the strong part, also strong in cost. If you are greening upstream, but downstream you are using methane, then the infrastructure will be valid, essentially, and also in end-use suitability, this will be strong. But really, in terms of contributing to energy policy objectives, greening upstream and downstream is the strongest one. But this comes with drawbacks, technically and in terms of cost. It's less mature, let's say. So these are different options. There is no clear winner, but and we expect different terminals to take different pathways. We have something that is very interesting, that is a comparison of costs of these different pathways. We are using wide ranges because there are high uncertainties, but I'm not showing the figure here, because if I do, you won't go to see the study. So I have decided that if you want to see the figures of cost for these pathways, you have to go into the study and have a look. Okay? Finally, we made a reality check. All these theoretical pathways that we are considering, are there projects for it? So here you see some projects. It does not mean that we're using LNG terminals and no projects, there are no projects, but we are focusing here on PCIs essentially. There are a lot of them regarding CO2 because that was in the Chinese regulation already. A lot of ammonia, some liquefied hydrogen. When we are dealing with synthetic methane, it's not here because you don't have to do much in the terminal, but there are also projects for that in the value chain. So what we see is that we are seeing different terminals, considering these projects and different projects. They are not betting on a single pathway. And finally, we made some recommendations that we can group in 4 blocks. One is about hybrid terminal regulation. I mentioned that you can combine different molecules in a single terminal, so you can combine fossil LNG with methane, with ammonia, with CO2. But we need regulators to recognize this diversity, and it's not easy. Because we are dealing with different molecules in facilities where we are dealing right now with just one molecule. Some of the infrastructures for those molecules are regulated, some are not. So regulation cannot be a deterrent, cannot stop these possibilities. We need really to engage with regulators and show them what we need to adapt. Second one, policy and regulatory environment. More widely, we need to align and coordinate EU regulations with national regulations. We need to do a lot in licensing and permitting, again related to the multi-molecule concept. We need those permits to be compatible. And have hybrid permitting in particular. We need to activate also measures to lower costs in the value chain. Third, policies upstream. We are talking about international value chains, so we need to work with the countries we are going to import molecules from. The European Union won't be self-sufficient, or there can be chains within the European Union. But we need to work on standardization, certification, guarantees of origin. This, is huge, the Union database issue. We have defined very stringent measures, very stringent definitions of what is renewable hydrogen, for example. We are doing that with low-carbon hydrogen now, and we need to ensure that that is compatible with whatever we are importing. So we also need international or develop strategic partnerships. And last, policies downstream. This is also important. We are doing this to decarbonize the end use. So we need visibility on that demand, policies that foster that demand, and we need to work with customers. Thank you very much. You have this study again available on our website, and I hope that you can have a look at it.
Thank you very much, Luis. And definitely you can look at the study and then you can ask him questions, but probably later, once you have digested the whole study, which actually, I mean, there is a lot of material and it is a very interesting study. Now we are going to turn to the second panel, and I would like to invite the three panelists to join me on stage. Magdalena Valibona, coming from Ceramuni, Arnaud Bux, President of GIE, but also CEO of FluxSuisse, as well as Senior Vice President of Fluxys, and Michael Walebowski, who is over there, who is a Senior Manager Climate Technology and Policy at Bellona Europa. You can also come next to me. Okay, when I am translating myself, because otherwise I'm going to be completely isolated, which is not nice at all. Thank you very much for joining me, and actually very much looking forward to discuss with you this role of gas infrastructure for a successful industrial carbon management strategy and energy transition. Magdalena, I will let you get some water because I want to start with you, since you are the representative of the industrial sector here, or at least one industrial sector. And I would very much like you to explain a little bit about your industry and the specificities of your industry, and also how you are planning to decarbonize.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I see I'm the only one on the side of, let's say, consumer, or as you call it now, off-taker. So it's an ambitious challenge. But I will give you first a few key facts about the ceramic industry. In fact, ceramic industry is an energy-intensive sector. Around 30–35% of our production costs are energy costs in normal conditions, which we are not in since 2 years, as you know, since 2022. Currently, the industry is using mostly natural gas. It's 80% natural gas, and the remaining 20% is electricity. Of course, we are thinking about the future. The future is, first of all, we have developed a roadmap. So we have a concrete roadmap by 2050, where we have identified clean transition pathways. We also tried to estimate the abatement costs, of course, and the alternative energy needs. When it comes to different pathways, we have taken into account the 3 different routes. So the clean, green, actually electricity, green hydrogen, as well as biofuels in broad sense. We do also take into account the need for carbon removal technologies, the CCS for sure, CCU, but mostly at the end of the decarbonization pathway, so after 2040, 2045, when we have still the need to abate the most difficult process emissions that come from raw materials in our industry. Also, to give you a little bit of a taste, in the decarbonization roadmap, we took the assumption that all these 3 different pathways, the 3 main pathways, so the green electricity, green hydrogen, and biofuels, come in equal shares. So for us, it's around 50,000 terajoule per year by 2050. In total, it's around 150,000 terajoule by 2050. Of these alternative energy sources together. And to give you a comparison, today the industry uses 240,000 terajoule, which means we have to become much more energy efficient. So it's around 40% of energy efficiency needed to be gained with the new alternative energy sources or carriers. The specificity of our industry is, of course, connected with the fact that we have numerous plants, dispersed plants all around Europe, in practically all member states, the industry is present. It's 1,600 plants already in ETS 1, ETS 2, so it's more than that, but it already gives you the perspective of the number. So numerous small plants, and of course it has consequences on our energy needs. It has consequences on the grid. We need access to let's say, extensive grid in often remote areas locally. It also has a consequence on the fact that we need diversified supply. So we need all kinds of possible energy sources. There's different energy mix in different member states, different pathways in different countries to arrive to net zero. That means that we have to prepare also with net zero technologies for our industry, which have to be diversified. In terms of the third element, I would say it's a security of supply. It's an industry that needs a stable and secure supply. The temperatures we operate reach 1,600 for certain products, 1,200 for others. So it's, as I said, very energy-intensive process, and it operates 24/7, of course. So we need a stable and secure supply. When it comes to the future, also what is connected, of course, with our decarbonization projects is that the green energy sources need to be available. That's the first precondition. Any decarbonization investments will be in vain as long as we don't have the green electricity, the green hydrogen, etc. They have to be available in sufficient amounts. That's one element. Also, in equal access to all industries. That's another topic that maybe I will go into more detail later. And also the third part is the one that we have to mention as well. That's the question of affordability and competitiveness of the prices of the alternative energy sources. So we are looking into the future with these lenses. There are many decarbonization projects in industries. There are still many barriers, but of course we do have high expectations. We have high expectations when it comes to the new mandate of the Commission, to the Clean Industrial Deal. We have seen also a very insightful report of Mario Draghi that identifies clearly the competitiveness gap that is currently for our European energy-intensive sectors. And the main roots of that gap identified by Draghi is, of course, energy costs, and the second is the carbon costs. So we see the need for action. We don't want to have another, Green Deal 2.0. We need something that is better targeted, more targeted to energy-intensive, that addresses the roots of the problem. And I think for the moment I will stop. And that there is more I can go into detail, but this is just an introduction.
Well, this is already a very comprehensive introduction. We talked about an industry which is right now mostly natural gas using, 80%, looking at different options to decarbonize, green electricity, green hydrogen, biofuels, including biomethane, potentially CCS, but towards the end for process emissions, right?
Yes.
So Anne is looking also at affordable energy supply and secure energy supply 24/7. So not an easy customer, and also a lot of small users, 1,600.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Okay, so we see already the problem. This is going to be a real-life example because, I mean, all those who are dealing with gas infrastructure are going to have to deal with such customers. Now we are going to turn to something with you, Michael, that I think 2 or 3 years ago was very difficult to say in Brussels, CCS. I mean, I remember people were looking at you like, what are you talking about? But you have been talking about CCS for quite a long time. And now, well, CCS seems to be back in favor. At least we can talk about CCS in Brussels streets. So what is happening there? And how can CCS, in your opinion, contribute to the decarbonization of the industrial sector here?
Yeah, thanks for the invite, and happy to share our climate NGO perspective. So we are Bellona Europa. We've been arguably the first environmental NGO that started talking about CCS already in 1993 in Norway. Not myself, my colleagues in Norway. Bellona played a key role in putting together the plan for Northern Lights, which is sort of the poster boy project for CCS. So the idea of having the state acting as the coordinator, funding CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. That's something that that my colleagues at Bologna had conceived, and now we are very happy to see this is now materializing. And indeed, there was a first wave of CCS back in 2009-10 up to 2015, more or less. An ambitious plan to have 12 demonstration plants, 12 demonstration CCS projects on power plants. This failed, and maybe for good reasons, because decarbonizing electricity there are better options to do that. Maybe not in every place, but in probably in most cases. And what we as Bologna have been saying is we need CCS, but for industrial decarbonization, for heavy industry, for these stubborn emissions, what people call hard to abate, and we call it harder to abate, because we recognize it's not easy, but we think that it's not impossible either. So sectors like the classic sectors like cement, steel, chemicals, but as we know here from Magdalena, it could be an option for some sites from other sectors like ceramics, waste incineration, and there are other applications for CCS. What we see as the main obstacle in getting CCS off the ground is the lack of transport and storage infrastructure. And that's where we've been focusing our efforts, because we see CO2 transport and storage infrastructure as a public good. That's our ideal in a way, in the sense that we cannot expect a ceramic plant to build a pipeline or operate a storage site. Or a cement plant or an ammonia plant, for that matter. So there is a role for the government to step in and give an impetus to coordinate things where necessary to provide funding. Other aspects that we've been pointing out is that we shouldn't be relying only on pipelines. I know this is the most interesting aspect for this crowd here, but we should be also supporting other modes of transport, shipping, rail, trucks, barges in some cases, because indeed in some cases it's probably not economically viable to build a pipeline connecting a remote emitter with the transport and storage infrastructure. So for these cases, you may need to use trucks or barges if there is a river connection. So we've been advocating for recognizing these other modes of transport, so they can also be eligible for EU funding. And it's good indeed that now the momentum for CCS is back. We have, at the EU level, we have to recognize that there have been some groundbreaking, game-changing developments there. We have the industrial carbon management communication, the industrial carbon management strategy, as we often refer to it. We have the Industrial Carbon Management Forum, which met for the 4th time this year, and we see that the audience is growing, the interest in CCS and CCU and carbon removals is growing. What has been an absolute game changer is the NZIA, the Net Zero Industry Act obligation on oil and gas sector to put in place 50 million tons injection capacity for CO2 storage. And this is probably the biggest game changer in the CCS in the latest, in the recent years, because this is indeed addressing or solving the partly or to a large extent the chicken and egg dilemma, where we had emitters who wanted to invest in capture but didn't have the certainty about the transport and storage infrastructure. And then on the other hand, the transport and storage infrastructure, they didn't want to invest in the infrastructure because they weren't sure whether the capture installations will materialize. Now, having this target put on the oil and gas sector, which we think is very fair because they are to the large extent responsible for a lot of climate change-related damage, provides an incentive, sort of increases the certainty for industrial players to consider CO2 storage. I think carbon removals were mentioned as well, and this is what we've been saying is removing CO2 from the atmosphere or from biomass is important, should not, however, sort of deprioritize CO2 reductions. So let's first deal with CO2 that we know, I mean, is of fossil origin and is being emitted by industrial sites. But we know that our climate scenarios show the need for removals, and for removals to happen, we will also need CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. Because once you capture CO2 from the atmosphere, you need to do something with it. Ideally, store it permanently in geological structures, and for this you need storage, and you also need to move it from one point to another. So perhaps I pause here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive picture of, well, CCS, and a little bit of carbon removal as well. Arno, you have been listening to Magdalena, so typical small industrial gas user looking at decarbonizing the industry, and also at what Michael was mentioning about CCS and kind of change in the mood regarding CCS. So how is the gas industry basically prepared to deliver green molecules or low carbon methane to Magdalena, and also contribute to the offtake of CCS, which is also going to be one of the solutions?
We are preparing in many ways to face this challenge, but also the opportunity, because for us it's a fantastic opportunity to reposition ourselves at the heart of the energy transition. MEP Wechsler said it eloquently and precisely, actually, this morning when she said that the gas infrastructure, the existing gas infrastructure, is the enabler of a green and affordable transition. Actually, that closes the session, because this is it. Everything is said. Enabler means a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition. Lots of other things have to happen, of course, but it will not happen without us. Okay. That is, it has been our conviction from the very beginning, and the conviction starts to spread for good reasons. Why now? I think there are two elements. The first one is that, not surprisingly, we learned that the plan is not the reality. There is always a difference between the two. That means that you need to be ready to adapt as reality unfolds. And we can provide this optionality. I can come back to that. While we are transitioning, we still need to ensure security of supply, that was also mentioned, which we can provide. We need to do this in a cost-efficient way, that was mentioned, and it becomes more and more apparent also. We can provide that. And we enable this transition not only for the gaseous energy vectors, but also as a provider of flexibility to the electric part of the energy system. And we talked about it this morning, and also the hurdles that are still in the way for that to emerge. So we can provide flexibility, optionality, security of supply, efficiency for different carriers as they unfold. So more and more policy starts to be, again, technology open, which sounds nice, but which first of all means that we need to be ready to face several scenarios as they play out. And this is what I mentioned, or what I meant when I said optionality. Luis also referred to that in his presentation. Our infrastructure can provide logistics for hydrogen. Certain elements of the infrastructure have to be changed and adapted, but it can provide it. We can provide functionalities to a CCUS system, And by the way, we not only grids, but also terminals. So shipping solutions are also part of what we are looking at. And in order to get to a port, to a terminal, we are happily accepting also trucks and trains and barges and everything else that moves. So we can provide to that. And of course, we are also a drop-in system for different forms of low carbon or even green molecules. So when you think about it, it's very hard to come up with a better system, a better infrastructure to face the challenges that we have before us. In other words, if we hadn't the system that we have today, we probably should build it. And my personal assessment is also that we will build more, contrary to what some claim that we need less of the stuff. I think we need more of the stuff, more steel in the ground. Now, that doesn't mean that every meter of pipeline that is in the ground today will be used. That's something else to say. But overall, we have, with the gas infrastructure, a tool for competitiveness and for resilience that the world envies. There's a lot of talk about global competitiveness and what are the strengths and weaknesses of different regions in the world. Probably low-cost labor is not our force, not our strength. More and more we also find difficulties in providing subsidies to the extent that, for instance, the states have done in the last years. Natural resources, well, they are what they are. But we have a natural resource in the form of our gas infrastructure that frankly is unique in the world. No other region in the world has such an infrastructure at its proposal. And when I hear some people actually questioning the use of that, it makes me very nervous because it is really a refusal to recognize this fantastic opportunity that we have. So that is how we see things, not surprisingly very positive when it comes to our assets. And that is before even considering storage. And I deliberately have left this to the end because the more and more our system is both on the supply side, but also, if we think about electrifying heating, on the demand side, depending on the weather, so highly volatile and non-controllable, the more we go in that direction, the more sources of flexibility of energy storage are not nice to have, but absolutely critical. And there is no more efficient way to store energy than in the form of gases than we have today. There we're not speaking of a factor of 5 or 5 or 10, we speak hundreds. So this is really key to the transformation. If there's really one element at the core of the energy transition from a system perspective, don't speak about production, I don't speak about the final supply, but in the middle, in the system, the one key resource that we will need is flexibility, and guess who can provide it? We can. So that is the role for a gas infrastructure in the future. It is a principal role, I would say.
And we are going to talk again about flexibility in the next panel. But I wanted to go back to you, Magdalena, because of your specificities in your industry. So you mentioned a lot of different consumers looking at different options. But is there one trend which is emerging when you are looking at the medium term between the biofuels, biomethane, maybe green electricity, green hydrogen, in terms of maybe availability, but also looking at the gas grid? I mean, looking at how you are going to move from one energy to another. Is there one aspect which is more appealing than the others?
Well, that's a very good question. Of course, everyone would like to know the answer. In fact, we are observing right now that there is a huge range of new decarbonization projects coming out, in fact, after 2022. So since the energy crisis in the fall of 2022 folded out, we have many new projects online, some pilot plans, and we are testing everything. So, of course, I cannot give you an answer A, B, or C. There's different progress on different things. It's also a very heterogeneous industry, so it means that for some products, certain things work better. For other products, there needs to be more testing. There is also some technological barriers still, for example, for products which are fired at very high temperatures, so like 1,600, etc. So of course we are testing it all. As I said, there's many new projects, including green electrification. Also, just to say, we have in our roadmap used different timelines for different technologies, because of course the advancement of technologies differs. Biofuels, biomass, biomethane, that is available, that is already being used. When it comes to green hydrogen, we have assumed that it will not be immediate. We have assumed, I think, 2035 as a starting point, and even the full fold out after 2040. It is due to different reasons. One is availability, but we are also something that I cannot give 100% because, as I say, we are already testing a lot. But just to give you a hint, we are testing with not green hydrogen. It's just not even available for testing for us. So we are testing with gray, we're testing with blue, we're testing with whatever we have. But just to give you the limitations there. And also for green electrification is the same. To connect something to the grid right now, in certain countries, impossible. And I'm not even speaking about long waiting periods. It's just impossible right now. So of course there needs to be many barriers on the way, not only technological, but also the market and the availability of these sources. So of course I cannot give you a 100% answer, but we are trying it all. So I agree fully with what Arno said about the technological neutrality, technological openness. That's something very important for us right now at this stage of our decarbonization pathway. Also, maybe one more element that I would add is that we need still support in terms of funding. And it has to be something more EU-wide, something better coordinated at European level. We have observed after, with the transition crisis framework, temporary transition and crisis framework, a lot of national carbon contracts for different schemes, many projects developed at national level. We need that at EU level. That needs to be addressed at EU level. And here, both need to be addressed, CapEx and OpEx. Because again, when it comes to different technologies, costs differ. CapEx can be higher, OpEx can be higher, depends on what kind of fuel we switch to. There's a big difference in our industry. Also with CapEx and OpEx, so both need to be addressed when it comes to support for funding. And this is necessary at this stage.
So, Arno, I would very much like to have your reaction on Magdalena's dilemma and the ceramic industry's dilemma. So they're testing everything, so they're not really ready for anything specific. Of course, well, they are looking at hydrogen, but don't really have expectations that's going to be available before 2035. Yeah. So how do you deal, and I reckon that this is a bit unfair to you because a lot of them are linked to the distribution network more than the transmission network. But how do you deal in terms of planning with consumers which are all over Europe, have specific needs, want to have secure energy, and also affordable energy?
Yeah, that is of course the heart of the problem, right? How to get from A to B, even if we could build consensus on B, so the way to go to, which is not yet the case. But even if we had that consensus, still there will be lots of questions and debates about how to get there. First, I think we have to recognize the heart of the problem. Normally, typically, logistical chains get built by the people that produce a product and bring it to their customer. That's how it works. And that's how it has worked for our industry as well. The oil industry has built their logistic, the coal industry has built their logistic, the power industry has built their grids as logistics, and the natural gas too. Natural gas industry has built its own logistical chain, and it was financed by the margin on the commodity. And the margin was large enough to build that infrastructure. Now, what all the scenarios that we are looking at, and we don't know which one is going to play out by what degree, but they all have something in common. They all are much more expensive than the current ones. So nothing is going to happen spontaneously. That's where politics enter into the game, and politics, they can prohibit, they can impose, they can tax, and they can subsidize. That's the only thing they can do. And then they play the game and see what works. And the first attempt, the way I read it, is to go for green hydrogen. That was the big move of the last commission. It's also a big bet on cheaper electricity and on cheaper electrolyzers. to get the costs down. Can we say today it is a success? Probably not. Can we say today it is a failure? I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe too early to say that. But can we say that we will get there in the time envisaged? Well, no, we won't. That is pretty obvious because the BET doesn't realize yet. Electrolyzer costs are not coming down. And then there's the whole question of the market model for electricity, but that's another conference to do probably. So we are not really moving forward there, at least not in the speed and to extent that we were willing to do so. But if we want to build infrastructure, we need volumes. We need volumes quickly. So coming back on technology openness, what was the name of the general that led the war on Iraq from the American? He said, and a doctrine was named after him. And the doctrine, I think it was him. He said, give yourself one goal and give yourself the means to achieve it. Pretty easy but if we would only do that, I think we would be further than we are today. The one goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is the biggest challenge, that is the goal. And we have cheaper ways of doing that, much cheaper ways of doing that than green hydrogen. Let's look at a country that is not around the table anymore, unfortunately, I might add, that is the UK. So the UK chose as a reference for developing their low carbon hubs, which also turn out to be their hydrogen hubs, interestingly enough, and their storage hubs. They chose blue hydrogen as the reference, because that is what ticks the boxes to avoid greenhouse gas emissions. I know there's the upstream emissions, methane, and so forth. Yes, I know. And there needs to be progress on this side. Yes, the industry has recognized that, isn't working on that. But ultimately, the concept of blue hydrogen ticks the boxes. It's half or a third of the price of the green hydrogen. So I do hope that we recognize this opportunity and move into that direction and recognize this as the way to generate the volumes we need quickly enough to develop the infrastructure, on which then green hydrogen is more than welcome to piggyback. But we will not have, with the very low volumes of green hydrogen that are around, we will never come to justify the build-out of an infrastructure unless you are the German government and supposedly very deep pockets. So I don't see this happening across Europe, that Europe would sort of guarantee the build-out of a pan-European hydrogen infrastructure. I mean, prove me wrong, I would happy to be proven wrong on this point, but if we have the volumes, if we have blue and other colors, just blue as an example, then we might reach the critical volume soon enough to get going. Now I lost my track. What was your question again, Anne-Sophie? I'm sorry. How we prepare? No. Say again. What was the question?
I think I have lost the track of my question again. Yeah. But basically, how the gas industry was going to help deliver the energy that Magdalena needs, and she doesn't really know exactly which one.
We need big volumes to get to the build-out of the hydrogen infrastructure.
So Magdalena needs friends.
She needs friends.
She needs to team up with other industrial users.
Yes, absolutely. And that is, by the way,
doable, Magdalena?
Also true for CCUS.
Yes and no.
It depends.
Well, we would love to do that. The question is, if the availabilities are low, the competition will be high. So one of the reasons...
But if you team up with other industrials nearby who also want to decarbonize the same way you want to decarbonize, then Arnaud is going to be happy because he's going to be able to deliver more green energy, whatever it is, to you. You need the volumes.
Of course, that's correct. We do need it. It's just one of the reasons, for example, in the decarbonization roadmap that we have right now, we did also put 2034, 35 as a start of the green hydrogen for us, not only because of barriers or costs, but also due to the fact that there will be a huge competition on the market for green hydrogen, and many industries and larger industries than us would like to have green hydrogen. So what we will see very probably that soon the competition and the access to these alternative energy sources will be limited, and there will be huge competition for them. So for us, as a sector which is heterogeneous and which has different options, and also which is, at the end of the day, small plants, numerous small plants, we are afraid that we will have no access there. So what we are actually asking in our recommendations for policymakers is to make sure that there is equal access to all industries.
Which is going to be an interesting problem for Arnaud, because not only does he need to take into account the big guys that you are so afraid of, but he needs to take care of all of you who are waiting in the queue to get access to hydrogen. By the way, do you have any, are you colorblind? I mean, I hate the colors, but I know in your website you are mentioning renewable hydrogen.
Yes, and this is probably the answer. Well, we do wish all kinds, all colors. That's not a problem. And we, of course, also think that there's a necessity and a need for low-carbon hydrogen, support for low-carbon hydrogen, especially in the European legislation right now. But at the same time, our target there, we want to arrive, is net zero. And that's basically the answer. We need renewable green hydrogen.
Interesting.
Ultimately.
Ultimately.
How much are you ready to pay?
Yes, there might be a compromise on that. But since we were talking about low-carbon hydrogen, that gives me a very good introduction to CCS as well, because, I mean, CCS, obviously, if you want to have low-carbon hydrogen, this is how I call blue, by the way, Michael, if you are wondering, because I don't like the colors. We also need CCS. But are we ready? I wanted to ask you that. Are we ready in terms of the regulatory framework to basically also create an infrastructure of CCS pipelines or whatever other method to transport in Europe? Where are we on the regulation?
We're not ready yet.
We're not ready. Is it going to take another 3 years?
Well, we know the Commission is working on the CO2 transport package. We hope it will come out next year. I think it's an optimistic assessment, knowing that we are still, I mean, things are still a little bit up in the air with the transition with the new Commission. There are some elements in place now that allow us to think that this work will continue and will continue to be taken up by the Commission. What is needed and why EU is required to play a role is standards, CO2 specifications, to make to think of a CO2 transport infrastructure as a sort of pan-European network which connects, because inevitably it will connect emitters in one country with possibly cross-border connections, maritime transport, which also requires terminals. So there's going to be a lot of logistics, a lot of CO2 handling. To make this whole system interoperable, you need to have some common standards. Otherwise, equipment will not work if, you have a mix of different CO2 streams with different levels of impurities. It's crucial to come up with a common standard which will strike a balance between costs, because to purify CO2 costs money, and we already see this dynamic sort of tug of war between storage transport operator and transport operators and emitters who should be paying for purifying that CO2 so it meets the standard. Now I lost my train of thought. Standards, because to make it interoperable. The cross-border element also requires coordination at the level that is not just member states. You will inevitably have to coordinate it at the EU level. Who should be doing that? It's an open question. I know the gas transmission operators think they are ready to take this on. There are good reasons for that. There are also some caveats. For us as an environmental NGO, we would like to make sure that investments that are needed in CO2 infrastructure are not deprioritized because, for example, it's a less lucrative business compared to other fuels. So we want the EU to also, member states and the EU to have some sort of oversight and to make sure that the rollout, the build-out of this infrastructure is aligned with the ambition that we have. And the ambition is huge. It's 50 million tons by 2030, 50 million tons of CO2 to be stored, which goes up to 270 million tons 2040 and 450 million tons in 2050. So that's a massive task. So yeah, a lot of work coming for the Commission. They also need to come up with at least some guidelines, because we don't think that the Commission needs to, dictate or impose everything. There are areas where it's better for the Commission to show some leadership, but a lot will also happen at the member states level. And in fact, I didn't mention that in my previous comment, but while we recognize the progress at the EU level, we see that member states, with some notable exceptions, are lagging behind. And there's not enough attention that is paid to CO2 infrastructure. A lot of member states are sort of hands-off. Industry will figure it out. But as I hope I demonstrated, this is a pretty complex task, and it requires a lot of attention from national governments as well.
And I'm sure, Arnaud, because I can see you moving next to me, you have a lot to say about the coordination, the readiness of the gas industry to basically develop the CCS infrastructure. But I saw you also reacting about Mika's worry about CCS not being considered as valuable as the other transportation. So tell us your opinion. I'm quite interested.
Yeah, I would have three elements on which I would like to comment. One is the purity. And Mika is perfectly right. This is a role for authorities to define this. We would like to underline that for CO2, the question of impurities is even more important than it is for hydrogen and certainly for methane, because impurities in the case of CO2 have the potential to kill an infrastructure in a very short time. Okay. So we're speaking years, not decades, years. And that has to do with corrosive and so forth. That's not the point. But the point is that impurities in CO2 are very, very critical. And from our perspective, the only valid principle here is that the polluter pays. I mean, what other principle would you choose? The polluter has to take the costs of the impurities that he generates. Certainly not ask his neighbor to do that. I mean, right? So that is there is some power play then, of course, and probably the first ones will try to get subsidies on this, but ultimately the principle needs to be the polluter pays or takes the risks, etc. But it needs to be on that side. So that's for quality standards. Financing, deprioritizing or prioritizing, etc. So under the assumption that CO2 infrastructure, I'm speaking about pipelines now, would be in some form regulated, inspired by what we see for the methane system and will see for the hydrogen system, then it is a system of allowed revenue based on invested capital. And that means that for us, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what is in the pipe. The only thing that matters, cynically speaking now, is the return on equity of the pipeline. Voila. And then it is a priority that has to be decided by the regulators or the policymakers to see where we put priority. If you want to see priority on a certain infrastructure, give it a high remuneration, and it will materialize. It will materialize if, and that's the third point, we have the right tools for de-risking. De-risking is a word I didn't know a year ago. I learned it, and it's very important, actually, because we were struggling with this as a company, trying to come to FID on hydrogen projects, on CO2 projects, and always coming to the same point, and now our colleagues have the same, actually. Yeah? It was explained in several interventions this morning, is that you want your infrastructure to be future-proof in terms of sizing. So you don't size it for the first customers, but for the ultimate need, the anticipated need. But that triggers costs that would, if you let the first customers pay these costs, prohibitive.
Yeah.
So how to deal with that? The magic word is de-risking, and it sums up all the different measures or tools that can be used to overcome this hurdle for an investment decision. Christoph explained very well the German approach, which is actually clever in the sense that you don't subsidize, you don't grant an infrastructure into existence, but you push the costs into the future under the assumption that there will be customers in the future, that they will then pay for the infrastructure used by the first customers. That's the principle, and it's a very elegant one, and it comes with a pre-financing and the guarantee of the risk that it fails. So that is actually neutral to the budget of a state, right? It's neutral. It's a guarantee, and it's a loan. It's not an expense. The expenses should be given there where, so on the commodity side, where actually customers need money to sort of restructure their whole process and change tools, etc. Or contract for difference to bring the consumers and the producers together. So this is where subsidies are needed. An infrastructure that would need a continuous subsidy sort of has proven the fact that it's pointless. If it's not needed enough to be realized, it shouldn't be realized. Okay, so it's a counter argument to say that if it makes sense to have an infrastructure, it should be, or you can assume that it will be financed by its users. The question is just how to overcome the construction period. And there are several de-risking models exist, and probably you should ask in economics which one is the best. If there is such thing as the best, maybe the most fitting one for a certain government, etc. But there are several, and it is needed. And it is more critical to get going, to find the right de-risking tool than, for instance, to spend dozens of pages to define after the comma, what is a low carbon gas or a renewable gas, to a degree that you're pretty sure that the market will not emerge. So this is what is needed. Standards, quality standards, because someone needs to take the lead. If you wait for bilateral gas quality agreements, I mean, we have been doing this for a long time. It's the same time frame as the trade agreements between continents. It takes 5 to 10 years to come, spontaneously to such an agreement. Someone needs to take the lead. That is important, and the de-risking tools. And then over time, regulation in terms of cost regulation, in terms of access, all the stuff that has been developed in ENTSOG will be developed in NOH. That can come over time. De-risking, quality standards to start with. That is super important.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have time for
May
one.
I come back on one thing?
Oh yeah,
Sorry,
okay. Then
just one. Come back.
Think about one question.
So I do, of course, de-risking is very important also for us, for industry. I already mentioned carbon contracts for difference. For example, now in Germany, 2 of our companies just won. The 2 out of 15, so think it's really tiny. If you think about the needs, the scale of the needs, 15, and only 2 from ceramic industry. I mean, it's a lot, but it's of course very little if you look at the whole scale of the project. I also wanted to come back to Arno's point on are we moving in the speed we want to? Because that's also something that I would like to agree that we are not. And this is quite visible also for us. And here it's a call also for the legislators to give a little bit of breathing space, because we are increasing the targets, we are increasing the ambitions, we are squeezed here. We are already talking about 2040, beginning of next year, to increase the climate ambition. But we are squeezed as energy-intensive industries, with the ETS and other burdens that come on the cost side. So that's also a call there.
And it's very good because in the next panel we are going also to talk about competitiveness. So stay with us. And again, I'm going to ask or to allow for one question. We have one question in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Megan Richards from Ruud Peterson. I wanted to ask you a question because you're talking about gas infrastructure, and of course, carbon capture and storage directive, EU directive, has existed since 2009. I suppose it's finally been introduced into the national systems by now. But to what extent does transportation between member states have to take place? It's nice of the Norwegians to offer to take all the carbon, but surely we have a lot of depleted coal mines, which are not being used anymore, old depleted gas reserves, etc. To what extent can this be done domestically, perhaps excluding Malta and some smaller countries? Is this really a big transportation problem, if there are storage facilities, or is this is something that local populations are going to refuse and say, not in my backyard?
I think the question is probably for you.
Partly you've answered this. We would like to see as equally distributed storage capabilities as possible. But there is the reality on the ground, including public resistance, which is not only characteristic for CO2 storage, but for any type of big infrastructure projects. What we see at the moment is that indeed we have some leading countries where the storage potential is being developed a bit faster than in other countries, and this seems to be concentrated in the North Sea basin. And I think before we see storage developed in other parts of Europe, I think inevitably there will be a lot of cross-border transport from different parts of Europe, now sort of gravitating towards the North Sea. There are developments in other parts of Europe. Let's see how fast it develops. I think, and let's not forget, there are some countries where CO2 storage is banned, so it's impossible, or they don't have geological sort of capabilities to store CO2. This is the case of Finland, for example, or Estonia. Yeah, these countries will have to move CO2 to some other parts of Europe. So in this sense, I think there is quite a lot of, there's a big need for this cross-border transnational transport of CO2, if that makes sense.
And I think Arnaud also wanted to add something.
This is a very good question, and a very relevant question too, for us now as transporters. And I think there are two answers to that, or two aspects to it. First one is, if we look at the geological potential, okay, I think as an order of magnitude, it's fair to say that the potential for underground storage is as evenly or unevenly distributed across the geographies as the natural resources. There were countries that had huge gas reserves, other had smalls, other had none, and for CCUS, it's more or less the same, let's say, in order of magnitude. So just from that, there will be a need to build transport to the extent that there is or not a geological potential for storage. But there is a second layer on this, and that is the layer of, let's say, the easy solution. And I will take Germany as an example here. Germany, in its CCUS strategy, has said that they turned their political ship around, and they came from prohibiting even the transport of CO2 to allowing it, to tolerate it. And they said, and yeah, for the matter of storing it offshore, okay, we can allow for transport of CO2. And if one of the lender is willing to store it, they can try and find public acceptance. So it is choosing the politically easy way to get the stuff out of sight, out of mind, and let others do a business with that, and fine with us. But don't create a political hassle in our country. So I understand the approach. Yeah, it's a downhill sort of approach. Now, what does it mean in terms of infrastructure? You can easily imagine that the shape, the size, and hence the cost of a pan-European CO2 infrastructure that would have to move everything offshore, as opposed to one that addresses the unevenly distributed geological potential across its territory. We speak about two very, very different networks. And the second one is obviously smaller than the first one. So we would drive the societal costs up massively just from a transport perspective if we exclude onshore storage. And of course, onshore storage is also by itself much more cost efficient than offshore storage. So you increase the cost 2 times by pushing it politically, by pushing it offshore. And the worst case scenario, of course, would be if we start building infrastructure from, let's say, Central Europe to the North Sea, and 5 years after commissioning, Austria changes its mind and says, yeah, why not store onshore? Let's do that. It's cheaper. It's better for our industry. And then we have created a wonderful system of stranded assets. So that is why our call as transport system designers and operators to take here a long-term decision and to stick to it. Either you want to realize the geological potential for this, in your own country, or you don't, but then you have to pay the extra costs and keep paying it and not change during the operations. So that is a call for, let's say, long-term policy. It's a very hopeful call, of course.
Well, this is going to give a lot of work for the new European Commission to decide indeed. And stick to the policy. Well, thank you very much. I thought it was a very interesting panel. Thank you to the three of you, Mikael, Magdalena, and Arno. I think they really deserve a round of applause. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for the GRIDTech talk, Matti Malkameki, Chair of the Botania Steering Group and founder and chairman of the ICAMI TCD Technologies.
Thank you.
The floor is yours. And I think to all my panelists for the next panel, if you can get mic up, the booth is over there. I think some of you have, but please do that because we are on in 10 minutes.
So I was asked to keep here the third GRIDTech talk, and so greetings from the Nordics, the winter wonderland, if you will, in this case Finland. And I will go through three different, small points in my presentation. So first of all, my company. Hooghiem is one of the fastest growing hydrogen companies in the world. We are based in Finland, and the technology is coming from more than 20 years of R&D done in the university, local university there. And as an answer to the previous question, so what to do with the carbon transporting and so forth, we have solid carbon. So we are a methane splitting company. We are producing so-called turquoise hydrogen for those that love the colors. And we have now the largest methane splitting facility in the whole of Europe that we are commissioning in Finland. So we are already on industrial scale. This plant will have a capacity of 5.5 tons per day. And with our partners, especially in the USA, we are now developing plants that are capable for producing 250 times more than that. So we are on grid level, so to say. But then to the Bosnia. So we have a hydrogen valley in the area. We have here a couple of geographical maps of a southern part of Finland, and you can see on the right-hand side, sorry, on the left-hand side, all the industrial sites where we have hydrogen coming now on the region. And on the right-hand side, on the other hand, there's a press release that came out last week, Wednesday, 27th of November, from GASCADE, the local grid utility in Finland, that announced the new lines or the ways that where the hydrogen pipelines in Finland will be built to. And the building of these ones will start on 2027. So first about the association that what we have here. So we have started an approach where we are seeing that to make this hydrogen reality to become real, I mean, the building the ecosystem, you need to have very large connection to all the players on the ground. So we have an association where we have more than 100 engaged partners, including business and tech companies. We have investors there, also, for example, from Germany. And we have the public partners, whether they are research institutes, schools, or some municipal development companies and so forth. The forecasted production of hydrogen that what we have for 2030 now from the projects that what we are building there or we are making the permitting is 350 kilotons per annum. And we have established there something like 11 different value chains worth 3.6 billion euros of investments that what we are getting to this area. We actually tried to seek for financing from the European Commission for this Hydrogen Valley now on the latest call, but we were cut out because we had too many value chains, and there's perhaps a discussion worth that whether we should only have like one value chain or whether we should incorporate all of them together, but that's perhaps another thing. There's also been discussion here today about the energy and the green hydrogen energy, so to say, systematic play, that how it is going. So in Finland, we have now altogether about 7 gigawatts, a bit more wind energy. We are getting like 2 gigawatts every year more. We had to actually build even the roads there on that area where we are. This area is providing about 5 gigawatts of wind power capacity at the moment. And because of the development being there so dense, we have had to strengthen our road systems. The roundabouts are made wider and so forth. You can drive past them and so forth in order to get those special transportations ready. We also have been able to get some how to say, international investors there. So for example, the latest one that came last week was that Google decided to build 2 data centers in Finland, one in this area and the other one a little bit more to the eastern side of Finland. But this is something that where we are also seeing that this data center development together with the green electricity that what we have is getting us a lot of surplus on this hydrogen development. The CO2 removal potential what we have there is about 5.5 million tons per annum, so that is also meaningful. And what is also important to understand here is that when we are talking about the CO2, we are also not talking about just something that we need to put on ground, but we have a lot of bio-based CO2, so that we can actually build new products out of that, make e-methane, make all this kind of e-fuels, if you will, in order to get them transported, for example, to Germany or elsewhere easier. Then about this grid. So GasGrid announced this new plan for making the grid system there, and that was based so that they made a lot of queries on different projects that what we have there on the site, and we are now starting to build the grid starting from the hotspots. So the approach there is a bit like that when you are building a motorway, you don't build that so that you start from the field, connecting one part of the field to another part, but you start from a crossroads so that you are seeing that, okay, we have a city here, there's a hotspot that needs a little bit like a more interconnection between the local areas and so forth, and then to distribute it further. So if you see those lines or those dots there on the left hand side, the most northern ones are something where we have a lot of biomass power plants, pulp and paper mills, and then also steel. And there's one hotspot. The next 2 ones in Oulu and Raahe. So there's new hydrogen consumption coming to Oulu. For example, this Google data center is located there. And on the other hand, in the city called Raahe, we have a steel mill of SSAB that is producing 7% of all the CO2 emissions that what we have in Finland. So we want to decarbonize that as well. So that's another hotspot. And then in Kokkola, where I'm coming from, we have a large inorganic chemical park. So that is actually the largest inorganic chemical park in whole of Northern Europe, producing battery precursors and other battery materials and us making the graphite as well. So that is another hotspot with the local biogas sites that we are building there. So this is how we are seeing it, that how to develop it. But also we have been thinking about this, that how to make this happening in a small scale. So we've heard today about very, very, how to say, big plans of making 9,000 kilometers of hydrogen pipelines in Germany and so forth. We have started a little bit more modest way, so that, for example, in Finland, we are thinking that when we have these green hydrogen production sites, and when you think that you have just one to start with, because you always need to start from somewhere, how does that one site fill the pipeline? So it won't. And we have discussed here about how to get from A to B. And this is where the low carbon hydrogen that Hooghiem is also doing comes to play, because our technology can make large volumes of low carbon hydrogen, and we think that we are a little bit like a nuclear to the power grid, or similar kind of technology that nuclear is to the power grid, so that we can fill in the pipelines, and when the green hydrogen is coming more and more, or when it's having a volatile production scheme, then we can fill in the gaps. And this is what we are doing. This is my 9 minutes now and the famous, famousness here in speaking to you. Any questions you might have? No? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matti. And I assume you are still going to be around after that for drinks, so people may ask you questions? Okay. Wonderful. Perfect. So it is now my pleasure to announce our third panel, which, as promised, is going to be this time about flexibility. So I would like to invite the four panelists to join me. I know that they have all arrived. Joachim Nunes de Almeida, Director of Mobility and Energy Intensive Industries at DG GROW European Commission. Charlotte Roule, President of GSE and CEO of Storengy. Whichever you want, this one is for me. I don't buy it, by the way. Jeroen Sanders, a member of the Executive Board, Chief Transition Officer at Enexis, and last but not least, Annika Brack, who is Director, Head of Practice, Energy, Mobility and Sustainability at CER. Thank you very much. So, for those who have not been around, we have been talking a lot about flexibility since the beginning of the day. And the question of the panel is, how can flexibility support competitiveness in a decarbonized energy system? Joachim, I am going to start with you. I think you just told me you wanted to talk a little bit more.
Can you repeat me the question?
Oh, okay. How can flexibility support competitiveness in a decarbonized energy system? If I were in France, I would say you have 20 minutes to answer the question. But no, in fact, you have 5 minutes to answer the question, and then we will have the opinions of the others.
Well, okay. So from our perspective, we think that talking about gas grids, the major issue is the repurposing for hydrogen. To bear in mind that hydrogen to be considered as both feedstock and energy, there needs to be a scale up of hydrogen that has not yet taken place, in the sense that we're still very much on the chicken and egg, that not much is produced because not much is bought, and not much is bought because not much is produced, and a lot of plans and a lot of so how can you make that step forward? And I mean, in my view, you could consider two possibilities. Either you massively subsidize the uptake of hydrogen, or you force the creation of markets, in the sense that you create you say that fertilizers have two, or refineries have two, etc., etc., etc. But it's difficult to consider that without that type of push, you're going to see a scaling up of hydrogen. We have acted a lot on improving the situation of net zero manufacturing by the access to market provisions, in particular of the Net Zero Industry Act, and we're also coming up with strategic projects on critical raw materials that might be interesting for this bit of the economy. This also means that we have to give consideration to infrastructural investment. The alternative between either reinforcing the grid and reinforcing the electrical, to improve the capacity of the electrical grid, that everybody seems to agree is not there or instead have hydrogen pipelines. What's better, what's worse, what costs less, what costs more? All this needs to be seen. On carbon storage and usage, we in GROW are more favorable to U than to S, in the sense that we think that there should be more of U. Circularity. And just to finish with, I mean, to give you a sense of the bottlenecks we still have. So, for instance, just to quote a little example, we've got 500 gigawatts of wind energy waiting to have access to the grid across the EU. And we've got many steel plants that would be very happy to have 1 gigawatt of renewable hydrogen, but there's nothing that brings that there. So there's a lot to be done.
There is a lot to be done, indeed.
There's a lot to be done. There are interesting things happening. There are positive signals in the right direction, but we haven't yet turned the cape.
And we need to get moving. So Jeroen, I'm going to come to you, since we just talked about the permitting and the fact that we have 500 gigawatt of renewable electricity waiting to be connected. And you happen to be not only on the electricity side, but also on the gas side, which is absolutely perfect. And you're also looking at biomethane and hydrogen. So
Yes.
how do we tackle all these issues, since you happen to be at the corner of or the center, maybe, of absolutely everything that we are currently discussing?
Yeah, maybe we also, as the Netherlands, in the center of the problems.
Or maybe the beginning of the solution.
Yeah, I start with the problems and then I will talk to the solutions. Okay, so we, as the Netherlands, we used to be a gas-based country. We had a lot of natural gas, and our energy is was based for 80% on natural gas. It still is large, it's 70%. And since 3 years, the energy crisis started, and also we closed our wells in Groningen, so we didn't have cheap gas anymore, cheap natural gas. And at once, all industry, businesses, but also the households started to think about all electric solutions. And that's what I meant with a problem we have now, and I recognize what you said, Hooghiem. There is a lot of production of solar and wind electricity. On the demand side, there's a large growth of waiting companies for capacity on the grid. And the first thing we did in the Netherlands, and actually we did already longer, is to start to invest a lot. We quadrupled the investments and we built a lot. We also tried to strengthen the assets, the grid, and all kinds of solutions. But what I also try to advocate for a few years now is that we also have to look at green gas, green molecules. Because in my opinion, to state it very simple, we cannot do it all electric. And that has to do with a few things. I think there are some simple reasons we need high temperature solutions for industry. I think transport by gases is much more efficient. Yeah? So if we can diminish the pressure on the electricity grid by natural gas, or not by natural gas, but by sustainable gas, it's much more favorable. But the most important reason, and that's why we're sitting here in this panel, is the flexibility we can create with gases. And that's also hydrogen, but also biomethane. Yeah. And that has to do with a few things, storage, and I think Joost will say something about that, but also the conversion, power to gas. And we can use hybrid solutions in the built environment. And the interesting thing is, and we are at a gas seminar now, but when I talk about this room, it's mostly going about electricity at the moment in Europe. And I think we should talk about both in a more integrated way, and that's really a challenge. I'm also a member of the board of GD4S, that's an association for gas distributors. And the first time when we said, okay, we want to join them, they were a bit hesitating because
what
we had
strange
gas
animal
and
is
electricity.
Coming? Yes,
Yeah, who's
gas
coming?
and electricity.
And what do you do with electricity? So I think it's very important, and Annika, we just talked about it, we have to talk in a more integrated way about the energy system, both molecules and electricity.
And I think, Charlotte, this is a perfect introduction to you, because for the past year we have met so many times talking about hydrogen storage and how hydrogen storage is actually that perfect complement which can help integrate renewable electricity and also lower the system cost. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie, and thank you both already for your contributions, because indeed it's I mean, what I will say will be completely consistent. And if you allow me, just one step ahead, concurring with you about the fact that we need the alliance of the electron and the molecule if we want to deliver energy transition really effectively. But then coming on the question of storage, and maybe starting with your question about how do we make, how can flexibility support competitiveness? I'm reading the question out loud so that I get it right. In a decarbonized energy system, the starting point is the decarbonized energy system. Indeed, through sustainable molecules, but also a lot through electrification. This goes with lowering, greenhouse gas emission. And then if you go for renewable, notably power, you increase the capacity, but then you have an issue about the fact that it is by nature intermittent, not really reliable. And either you overdevelop, but that's not really the answer, because at the end of the day, we'll have sun at the same time for everybody, wind at the same time for everybody, and then immediately the question of storage comes. And that's where actually you will create that flexibility, that competitiveness for your industry, for your consumer throughout Europe. So a few examples there, because actually we can put figures behind. It's the question of curtailment of renewable power, and that's a huge issue throughout Europe currently. I mean, we have figures, for instance, I'm thinking about Germany. It was really huge. 2022, it increased in 2023. So we have to answer this question of curtailment, and it cannot be fully addressed by, I would say, dispatchable energy sources, because some of them are quite carbon intensive. So indeed, then you have the solution of power to gas. So few elements. Renewable energy system, it comes as a complement, because it creates you a sort of energy storage that is, or energy flexibility that is at scale. It's really huge, actually, and you answer the needs in that respect. And then it comes also to improve the business model of hydrogen producers, because they can provide a reliable source of hydrogen to typically hard-to-abate sector, but overall the industry. And so indeed, that's a perfect complement. That's most of all something that is proven currently in terms of technology, and that's also the interesting part, because on the production side we are facing some challenges, but we can all see that what is happening on the market is infrastructure coming. So we are testing, we have some pilots, then what we need is to have a predictability for the investment. We need to be able to make investment decisions at scale. And that's what also we can provide with, typically underground storage, that's where I'm working on. Providing storage that will, or flexibility that will develop over time as the market is getting developed. And a few elements, so obviously I cannot resist in quoting some studies that we did, and notably the one in Gas Infrastructure Europe with Artelis and Frontier Economics. So we assessed what could be needed in terms of underground hydrogen storage, but before that, and so I can go through the values, that's not the point, but we went through what is the value of underground hydrogen storage? Does it make sense to do that kind of thing? And indeed, in terms of kickstart value, in terms of pushing the system ahead for renewable energy sources, but also for hydrogen, then you have indicators. And we wanted really to have that KPIs that we can follow with the Commission, so that there is not, like a blind commitment, go ahead with your storage, sure, future will be perfect. No, we can measure what we avoid in terms of greenhouse gas emission, what additional renewable hydrogen production would be created, and that's how we want to show all the values of underground hydrogen storage. So going over time and accompanying this transition.
And also to come back to the word competitiveness in the title, it can also lower the energy system.
So absolutely, and indeed, thank you, because I'm so enthusiastic about underground hydrogen storage. Indeed, it lowers the cost, because when you have congestion costs, that are billions of euros. When I was speaking about Germany, so that's how you can value them right now. Then having a system that remains reliable, that is there, so you avoid, the curtailment costs, you have an increased reliability, the effectiveness of the system is better, and then overall the economic approach is better. So you actually improve competitiveness, certainly overall. You maintain it, hopefully, compared to the existing situation, and we have to keep in mind that anyway we are going for a decarbonized energy system. So the alternative, which is, well, let's not change anything so that we keep competitiveness, just doesn't work. So we are changing, we are going to the energy transition, we are delivering it right now, so let's make it competitive indeed. And thank you for the
no
push.
problem at all. And Annika, you have also just completed a study which is also looking at flexibility, but you are coming from a slightly different angle, from the demand side. But you have also looked at other flexibility options. But maybe you can start with the demand side, because it's a bit different from the supply side that we have just listened about.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, who are we? The Center on Regulation in Europe, we're a think tank here in Brussels. Our particularity is that we bring together our national regulators and industry representatives and consortia, and then work with academics on studies. And one of our latest studies was indeed around flexibility and the role of renewable and low-carbon gases in that flexibility. We looked in particular at the use case of hybrid heat pumps. And it was very interesting to see. And I have to say the lead author is Kong Xiong, who's our research fellow and who's also currently with the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. So he is an energy economist. He modeled the energy system and came up with 3 scenarios. You have a reference scenario, which has relatively low flexibility, low backup capacity. You have a flexibility scenario where you have mainly demand-side flexibility, and then a reliability scenario, or the reliable scenario, which has then additional backup capacity. He found that there's a staggering price difference between the different scenarios. So you have a 5-fold electricity price increase by 2030 between the flexibility scenario and the reference scenario. So meaning that if we stay without flexibility, if we don't use demand-side flexibility, the electricity price in this modeling would increase by 500%. The hydrogen price also would go through the roof, even more than 500%. Why is that? Because in that scenario, due to the lack of flexibility and the high inefficiency of the system, we have higher capex. So the capex is 30% higher. And what does that mean? Like higher infrastructure investments, and you have the higher price difference. But also you have higher curtailment costs, and you mentioned that already. And a number of other factors, of course, a lot of peak load capacity, a lot of backup capacity that not only brings more fossils, but also more cost to the system. So yes, I want to follow Jeroen in this appeal to think about the system in a whole, use the infrastructure, and we heard it earlier from Fluxys, use the infrastructure that is already there. And consider it in a whole system perspective. And maybe I don't want to preempt your question to Joachim, but what I'm currently missing in the Commission plans is always this coordination effort between the different vectors of the energy system, but also between the DGs to really bring all these different elements together, and also through that the different aspects of flexibility, through the short, the middle, and the long-term flexibility, if you will.
So Joachim, what about bringing everybody together at the table, and maybe the industrials as well? We had a representative, actually still here, and a few others, in order to achieve exactly this. Better system, better management of flexibility, and happy customers.
Yeah. The question is of course, who's not against? Who would be against flexibility and plenty of opportunities? I tend to instinctively think that the more the better. For instance, you spoke about biomethane. And I didn't speak about biomethane, but we've got
we can talk about biomethane.
Nothing against. I mean, I heard a lot of pros about biomethane in the sense that there's much less need of redoing the grid than you have. The repurposing bit seems to be it's basically the same thing as it was for gas, whereas for hydrogen, although the repurposing cost has gone down, it still seems to be somewhat significant. I think that there is a sense in the Commission, so I do think there's an overall picture, and the overall picture is that you should go for electrification mostly, or that has been the line of the Commission, and then you would have hydrogen for the hard-to-abate. And in particular, this is now being, so that I think, but I think that nuclear has been brought into the picture, for instance, which was a bit new in the last 2-3 years, but you start having a sense of, so as much renewables, if you are about to decarbonize, probably it does make more sense. It probably doesn't make sense to get rid of your nuclear capabilities, but if you are at zero, it's probably could make more sense to start with renewables than with a nuclear capability, because you'll get there faster, according to, except for the SMRs, which are also factoring in. There's the SMR alliance that could also bear fruit, somewhat, not too. So you've got, those would be so renewables plus nuclear would produce you the electricity, and then for what electricity can't do, then comes in our friend hydrogen to supplement, for the famous hard-to-abate, or for the maritimes and the. But I often say this. I'm not married. I'm not married to any technology or to any form of energy. The goal is decarbonization. Whatever gets us there is good.
Okay, so maybe we can start with one obvious one. I'm sure you are going to like it, Charol. Biomethane?
Yeah, why not? I'm surprised by what you were mentioning about biomethane and the adaptation costs that we may have, because actually, so indeed for storage there is certainly a look at that, because we are dealing with not only with pipes, but apart from that, biomethane is quite an obvious one indeed, very much pushed in France. And actually, I'm saying very much pushed, but what I would like to share is that this is the only renewable energy, so taking the example of France again, that beated the targets that were assigned to it. So actually it's really happening, because you have a combination of big players producing biomethane, but also small players like, in the agricultural sector, and it's providing additional revenue. So it works quite well. And then we have to face some, I won't go into
did I say anything bad about biomethane? No, I didn't say anything
bad
about
I was just...
positively.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So just on the adaptation cost, there is not really adaptation cost. It's there. So we need to use what is there in terms of infrastructure. And then going further, I very much liked your question about how do we put everyone around the table, how do we work together? So there is clearly, we advocate, and this is work that is ongoing, an intermodeling approach. This is really what we need. I'm representing an infrastructure player at the end of the day, and the point is to understand how we can make an orderly transition, making the most of the existing infrastructure, either to alleviate the pressure on the power grid, that is, by the way, partly non-existent for the moment, which is one of the issues, and then also converting part of it to hydrogen typically, and renewable hydrogen to support the development of renewable energy sources, renewable power production, and then having huge capacity to store energy thanks to hydrogen. So that's, we are trying to have this conversation, clearly, but this is something that is helpful when there is this is a conversation that we cannot have only as infrastructure players with the industry, and governments need to jump in. That's really important.
That's another, for instance, that's another sort of ambivalent option is between the hydrogen storage and the electricity storage and the evolution of the various technologies. But indeed, from what it seems right now, storing hydrogen seems to be easier than storing electricity.
But it's actually, it is a way of storing electricity.
Well, you see, some people, yeah.
Well, there is a size factor.
You're going to
as
advocate for batteries.
But the technology of electricity storage is also going up, so yeah.
But maybe we are not looking at not exactly the same time frame. You are talking about seasonal storage.
No, actually, I want to intervene on that.
Okay.
I can talk about seasonal storage, but definitely I can speak about, that's the point. What underground hydrogen storage is bringing is obviously to a hydrogen producer, it will bring an ability to comply with the additionality principle in the delegated act, but also with the hourly correlation. And that's where I want to take you with underground hydrogen storage. We are talking about huge capacity. Indeed, then you can think about traditional underground gas storage and go for seasonal needs. But you can also meet some demand that is really, on a daily basis or hourly basis. So that's the frequency. So it's not only about cycling, it's about the frequency. And I will give you an example. We are working on a pilot project, and that's thanks as well to Europe, because we have the Clean Hydrogen Partnership in there. So Hipster, so that's a pilot project on underground hydrogen storage, but with a cavern. So we are really speaking about underground hydrogen storage in salt cavern. And what we are going to do, so it's starting, so we complied the tightness test, everything is fine, so we go ahead, and it's 100 cycles during 100 days. It's not the typical underground gas storage functioning that you would see. So you see, that's a different animal, if I may say so.
And on top of that, it allows you to provide stable hydrogen supply to people like Magdalena, for example.
In terms of industrial needs, it's really the point, because actually, Storengy, if I speak about Storengy now, is an affiliate of ENGIE. So ENGIE Group is working on hydrogen production, and the typical answer from industrial is, well, it's nice to have renewable hydrogen, but I need hydrogen 24/7, not hydrogen when it's sunny, when it's windy. So that's where storage provides an additional value, definitely.
Jeroen, I just wanted to give you the floor, because you are also going to be facing industrial storage, even though you are a distribution system operator. But you are going to have a lot of hydrogen coming from renewable energy sources. So are you aligned also with what Charlotte is saying in terms of this system where storage also complements the hydrogen, the renewable energy?
I think it will. So what we see is there are a lot of scenarios, actually. And what we do as a DSO is preparing at this moment for all the scenarios. It's like a kind of no regret innovation. And what's interesting, there's a lot of industry connected to our DSO, our grid, our DSO grid. And we're already preparing, like we have been talking about this afternoon, how we can use our gas grids for transporting hydrogen. And the interesting thing is we already have a small neighborhood of 30 houses working with hydrogen. I was thinking about the flexibility and storage. I think it will work, but also the choice between battery technology or storage underground of hydrogen. I think the markets will also work on this. So it have both a place in the market, and I think cost, about conversion costs, next to what's the price of batteries, that will in the end determine what will be the right technology. But I think it can work together. I think we need both, like I said in my earlier statements.
But as a DSO, you are not yet looking at hydrogen storage.
No, that's not. No, we are working on the transport in our gas nets, like I said, and we are not looking at storage at the moment now. No.
Interesting. Annika, I think you may want to react to what Charlotte was saying.
No, I mean, you're the expert on storage. I was just reacting because there's so many usage, there's so much competition around the usage of salt caverns. And I always feel like whatever industry's paper I read, they are planning with it. And that is not solved. So it's nice for hydrogen, but there might be still gas in those salt caverns. And when I talk gas, I mean, our project was part of a bigger package of projects on the path to net zero. So we, in our modeling, also see a hugely declining part of natural gas in the energy mix. It doesn't disappear entirely, but we're getting there. But just to say that on the way, we might want to use the infrastructure as best as possible and provide the right regulatory incentives also to use that flexibility. Also on the demand side. But so storage, that was just my reaction. I wanted to explain that. And coming back to my point, Joachim, you mentioned the energy mix, and we would always say at Zero also we need a very pragmatic approach to technology, and the member states need to make their own decisions, but it might be useful to have a better coordination.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And that, I'm not sure is seen yet. I heard today there's a task force on competitiveness, but will they look at, making this transition most cost effective? It would be great.
Well, the Commission started today.
Yes.
I don't know.
So
well, now you know that this is something to put on the table.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but definitely, for instance, you've got a point right, like the hydrogen infrastructure, an infrastructure of pipeline that presupposes a sense of how much hydrogen the economy is going to need, and
we are still trying to figure that out. Hence,
Voilà.
The first two panels were a little bit about that.
Yeah, so because.
But before, okay, so actually, you raised a very good point about security of supply. How are we going to move from using, for example, salt caverns for natural gas storage to using salt caverns for hydrogen? Are we creating new ones? Are we converting them? When do we know that we no longer need those salt caverns?
That's a conversation we have in each member state. And that's where probably it would be interesting also to have a view or, let's say, a coordinated approach thanks to the Commission. But then, at this point in time, this is a conversation which is happening in each member state. And it's not an easy one because the point is relevant there are two elements there. Obviously, we want to know how we organize, but most of all, what I think we need to keep in mind is that we are in a transition, meaning that it's not, from state A to state B, and then just like that, we go from natural gas to hydrogen. It doesn't work this way. You are fully right. And we need to have an orderly transition. And in that respect, you can sense, a difficulty or a delicate point in how do we do that, and how do we admit that we still need gas. Whatever it's called, it's better and it's biomethane, and that's what we push for, definitely. But even natural gas right now is needed. And that's a question of security of supply that we just faced, which was not really planned for this early winter. And that's where we are in terms of security of supply. We are very much needed. Even Fatih Birol mentioned that we should not, I don't know how we do that, because we answer the needs. We should not withdraw too much on the storage right now, because it's early in the season, but at the end of the day, that's it. Taking the example of France, 2 weeks ago, it was 3/4 of the consumption in the country that came from the storage, whatever storage, and not only storage. So there is this question. From our side, what we try to do is really to understand jointly with authorities in each member state how we convert, because our view is that we would convert the salt caverns to take hydrogen, because we are more comfortable in terms of technology with underground hydrogen storage in salt cavern. But there is this moment to find. And then, second point, because that was also part of your question, yes, we would create additional storage, most probably. To be seen, because we are still doing some research and getting more and more comfortable on other type of underground storage with hydrogen. But so far, because in Storengy we focus on salt caverns, then we would create some new, definitely.
I thought you actually wanted to say something.
Yes, I see.
So it's very good that you are mentioning that, because I mean we have just had this 1 month of Dunkelflaute, so very low wind, grey sky, right? We all agree. It's difficult to see the sun, and as a result of that, gas demand in power generation has been skyrocketing, and on top of that, it was cold, so therefore the gas demand in the residential sector was also increasing. And the result that we have seen is indeed that the storage levels, or the gas in storage, has been decreasing relatively fast. So how are we going to, I'm going to bring us back in time, because we were looking at the very, very long term where we are all happy and we have developed our hydrogen storage, but there is this kind of transition period where security of gas supply is going to be still very important. We are trying to develop the hydrogen market, still having questions on where the demand is going to come from. But how are we ensuring that there is still going to be enough storage to fulfill the seasonal needs, so for the residential customers, and also meeting some potential episodes of no wind, no sun, cold weather? Because this is important, and this has also an implication for the pipelines.
Yeah, indeed. And this is part of the assessment that is done. I mean, there is this 10 years view that we try to get, and then that is updated every year. So there is a work that is done by the infrastructure players at national level and at EU level that helps driving the works. And so I will, my answer won't be long, because I want everybody to be able to answer. I appreciate I'm taking the stage. But that's why also it's interesting to have underground hydrogen storage developed in salt cavern, because then you can, I was mentioning a bit earlier that you can accompany the development of the market, of the hydrogen economy, if you like, but reversely, you are not obliged to convert everything all at once. So it's really this question of scalability. You can go really big, but you can start relatively small. So, which is interesting per se.
What time periods are you thinking about?
So the time period, so we are thinking about either converting or developing new storage, and that's overall for the industry. And then you are talking about 6 to 8 years to 10 to 12 years. So it's not, and that's another point. We need to decide now for something that will be operational in quite a few years already. Yeah? So that can accompany also, depending on the country, a decreasing consumption in gas, whatever the gas. So that's why we have time. But as infrastructure player, we need to have the signals to invest. Otherwise, we won't be, I mean, in 5 to 6 years, nothing will have happened.
Annika?
Yeah, I'd love to add another aspect,
please,
which is that the salt caverns are unequally distributed in Europe.
Yeah.
And in my country, there are a lot in Germany, but in other countries, there aren't any, which leads me to the point that market integration, of course, remains very, very important, if not most important, for any solution we come up with, because it is the one element that would help us making all these technologies work together in the best and most flexible way. So I just wanted to say that, because I don't think we spoke about it yet, that the integration of the markets has to be a focus, and I know it's in the Commission books. So.
Okay, just wondering whether there are any questions, because we are chatting between ourselves, but I know that there has been a lot of interest in flexibility. Don't tell me you have all fallen asleep, this is not possible.
I heard some desperate
Daniel is asking a question. Fantastic.
Actually, I have a comment, but I'm trying to think how we turn it into a question. I'm Daniel Fraile from Hydrogen Europe. First of all, the comment is about the Dunkelflaute you mentioned before, because you said there was little wind and it was dark, but it was not cold. It was not very cold.
No, it was not very cold. It was colder than the previous years.
Because there were commentaries in LinkedIn saying, well, the prices didn't go up so much, so we know we can cope with it. So that's one point. The second one is about this coordination between electricity and hydrogen and gas. And I hear priorities electrification and then hydrogen for hard to abate. it sounds like, okay, this is decided, but is it sequential? Because I think that the big question, I think Charlotte was mentioning it, is hydrogen will be needed for hard-to-abate sector, might be also needed for flexibility. It takes a lot of time to develop these storages, and it takes time to plan. So the question is, if it's not sequential, then we need to start acknowledging that and start building it. And I think that's the question of the timing. I think you expressed it very well, but what is the timing when it comes from the electrification perspective and the electrification action plan? I think that's where we would like to see a lot more, the planning thinking for the hydrogen. And I know that wasn't a question, but hopefully it is.
Yeah, no, I was going to pick a mic, but I understood. I've got a mic with. No, I don't see it as sequential. I mean, what we know is that we need much more electricity, and we know that electricity is not capable of doing all the jobs. So there are hard to abate. So there are difficult sectors to electrify, or impossible sectors to electrify, and so you need hydrogen. Now, how much of one and how much of the other? Well, I mean, to give you a sense of also of coordination between the various net zero technologies, the Net Zero Industry Act establishes a net zero industrial platform that is going to start working this January. There's already a first, and that would be the place where these dots would be connected. But I think that you're going to have both a bottom-up type of development, hopefully, of projects mushrooming here and there, but you also need some top-down planning to take things into the right direction. But no, sequential, no, I never thought about it as sequential.
Jeroen, Charlotte, any comment from you?
Well, I mean, just one point maybe. I agree with you that sequential wouldn't work, but the signals are very much awaited now, because the technology is being proven, as I was mentioning, and there are some projects, including, by the way, in some countries where there is no salt. So it's not only about salt caverns, it's just the topic I know better for hydrogen, and that we are currently developing. So examples that I can share. But if we don't have clear signals, then there won't be further investment actually to adapt to hydrogen. And the challenge we have is the time to develop, whether it is to convert or to develop new storage. So that's why it's important to have this sector coupling approach, this integrated approach. It's absolutely crucial indeed to develop at the right time the infrastructure that will be needed. And that is partly already there. It's a question of conversion.
Question at the back.
I heard that there is kind of lack of power to gas integration and lack of offtake. Could a very easy start be what is written in gas hydrogen package blending to start allowing 1% into natural gas grid everywhere? So that gives you roughly a half Nord Stream worth of hydrogen offtake right away. I think it's allowed, and there are a few hydrogen valleys that have done it at a very small scale. Question is, should we just scale it up a bit?
I don't know about hydrogen, but I know about biomethane, that we're working on this in the Netherlands, and the blending obligation is working. It's creating demand, and we used to focus on subsidizing production. Was not really working, but since we create the demand, prices go up, it works for that. About hydrogen, I don't know.
It seems the panel is not really inspired by hydrogen blending, even a small percentage, Eric. I'm really sorry.
But the interesting question is, why not? Maybe.
Maybe.
No, but in my introductory remarks, I mean, I do think that the scaling up, I mean, the issue of hydrogen is the price, is the affordability. Demand and supply, I mean, see hydrogen is too expensive. And until people see the affordability case, and to get the affordability case, you have to scale up. And to scale up, either you subsidize the same way that you subsidize renewables until they became profitable, or you create markets by virtue of law.
But then again, put things together. because if you want to have, I mean, you consider that, not you specifically, the market, that hydrogen from a renewable perspective would be too expensive, but what about those curtailment costs? What about the congestion cost on the network? And that's where actually there is a way to connect the dots and make something that works and works effectively in terms of competitiveness. So, so that's where I would see additional things. But indeed, for the cost of hydrogen, and that's why probably we were not that comfortable with the question, blending is a possible answer, but so far it would increase the cost. And so it is interesting because you prove things and you go further, but it wouldn't fully demonstrate. It would be a way to push demand, okay?
But it doesn't demonstrate.
Yeah, that's it. Whereas actually putting together the question of, okay, renewable hydrogen is probably too expensive, but what about all those costs that I'm having anyway? I'm spending a lot in terms of, I mean, this wasted energy production, electricity production, which is a renewable one. How can we do something about that? That would definitely be an interesting topic to work on.
Accelerate grid planning even further.
That is definitely needed.
Yeah.
And you, there's a question here.
Hi, my name is Daan Peters. Unlocking the hydrogen market, maybe a suggestion for Mr. Nunes de Almeida. One wind turbine takes about 300 tons of steel. Would it be a suggestion to mandate green steel, hydrogen-based steel for new wind parks?
Well, that's the sort of thing that I think we need to start looking at.
Yeah. So this
if we want to create the mass dimension, exactly, because otherwise it won't.
Yeah, this is basically going in the direction of the 42% of RFNBO with the red free. But at the end of the day, what matters is, what is the cost for the end product? For example, if you're putting steel in the car or something like that, and how much, and is bearable for the end customer.
But the intermediary steps don't always consider that.
Yes, that's why you need to have integrated chain, and you need to be able to transfer the costs in an appropriate manner, which is not easy. And it's even more difficult with ammonia producers when you are going through the farmer stage. Okay, maybe I'm talking too much, but we are nearing the end of our panel. So it has been very lively. Thank you very much. In particular, thank you to Charlotte for animating the discussion. So thank you very much, Joachim, Charlotte, Jeroen, and Annika. It has been great to have the four of you on this panel. This is now the end of this panel, and I am very pleased to be able to give the floor to the two Secretary Generals of GIE and Eurogas and the Director of ENTSOG. So, Bojana, Andreas, Piotr, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Okay, guys are looking at me, so it means I should start.
Not only us, probably.
First of all, thank you for being here for the third year. Very interesting discussion. I will probably start with the start of this event where we had the MEP, which was saying something that I liked very much. She was using the term in relation to the gas grids, which is the lifeblood of the economy and also of the industries. And this is exactly the reason why, so we were probably really a visionary in this perspective, that already 3 years ago we had decided to work together on such kind of event and to showcase that the whole system can work together. So for us, many things were said during this conference. It is very important to emphasize once again on the word competitiveness. which was mentioned a couple of times. We are all very aware of the Draghi report, where this is exactly the core of the whole discussion around, this fantastic report. And from our side, as we are extremely reliable and very flexible as a system, we are proud and very happy to provide different solutions and different technologies, and to make sure that, let's say, all the variety of the technologies, what it is coming from that, we can transport it, we can store it. So what is important when we talk about competitiveness is that from our side, in the past years, the mantra is definitely that security of supply should go hand by hand with decarbonization. Of course, it's extremely important to focus on the targets, but you need to make sure that on the same time, what needs still to be developed is going to be there. So we need to make sure that the system works properly. There is a proper investment of what is still needed to be done in the perspective of security of supply, to make sure that there is no bottlenecks and the whole system is properly interconnected. It can solve all the bottlenecks, so you have access to LNG. And basically, on the same side, that you have all the possibilities to decarbonize. Then we've heard from the president of GLE how we can decarbonize the terminals. We also heard from Charlotte the big excitement of what kind of role the hydrogen storage can play in relation to competitiveness. And we also, as an association, work a lot on, let's say, providing studies and certain knowledge in relation to what we can do also in CCUS, in biomethane, but also, let's do not forget the important role of methane in the energy transition, indeed. So here, a reference, and probably is good to conclude with that, what the president of GIE actually said, is that there is no transition actually without our system and the system that we are operating. A couple of other things like the permits, the process needs to be speed up for sure. We are very much hoping indeed with the new members of the European Parliament that everything that we have been working on a lot in the past years, so the gas package, the hydrogen package, is going to be properly implemented. We are aiming for a very good and proper framework also for the technologies. And of course, a call for off-takers, which we hope is going to work well. That's from my side, with a big thanks to the teams of Eurogas, ENTSOG, and GIE that work on this, and yeah, hopefully finding out a good agenda for the next year, where I'm not going to be here with you. So, thanks.
Thank you, Bojana. Thank you very much, Bojana, and thank you very much, Andreas. Indeed, it's the third time we meet up to discuss, and I think it's always very inspiring, and also this third edition brought us to exchange on the importance of infrastructure on the way to decarbonize European economy, and also, I think, preserve our industrial base. So I think that these are these two takeaways we have to still maintain at the center of our interest. And if I would go the easy way, probably my conclusion would be there will be no transition without transmission, and full stop. But let's look at a few details. So when we look at our discussions, we see how important it will be to provide the infrastructure for hydrogen, not only to decarbonize, but also to bring quickly hydrogen to the end users via repurposing, to provide for flexibility, to provide for let's say bigger deployment of renewables, and finally to provide for energy storage in the future, on one hand.
And it's very inspiring and interesting to see that the projects are already being started in various parts of Europe. And of course, the big and ambitious program of Core Grid, which was presented today, is very important, and we'll see. And of course, everyone is now, let's say, looking how it will progress. Secondly, well, CCS, so how to also cope with hard-to-abate systems. And I think it's already visible that we won't succeed without proper transmission and proper transport, as it was mentioned, simply because of the fact that we are not equally blessed with the storage capacities. So this is the very important point for thinking about how to transport CO2 across Europe. Finally, reiterating what you said, Bojan, about security of supply. So we have to look at security of supply, stability of the system under different angles throughout all the transition period. And finally, few words on our angle, because we are this technical partner, and I think that in many cases it just boils to the details that we also have to prepare. So what will be the quality of molecules, what standards to apply for hydrogen, what standards to apply for CCS to make it a success, how to provide for integrated planning that will be reaping off all the synergies. So we also have to remember about the technical aspects of the energy transition. And finally, maybe two quick calls I would like to get out of this room and outside of this venue. So first of all, it would be good to see the molecules as the part of the new grid action plan, not only talking about the electrons. Let's look at system efficiencies, planning. It's sometimes planning two systems efficiently is better than the one. So the first call. The second call is let's work together to find solution, and quoting Arno, there is the future projects. So to make them implementable in a fast manner. Stopping here and thanking the teams and the colleagues for cooperation. Looking forward to the next year.
Well, thanks indeed to both of you as well for the great cooperation. And I think, being the last person to intervene is definitely the moment to say, well, everything has been said, but perhaps not by everybody. But I'll try to just maybe mention one or two things I think that are really relevant for also this conference. Because the point that clearly came across for me from all of the different discussions is that really gas is not just an important part of the energy transition, but it turns out to be really also an essential part of the energy transition. I think you just said it, there will be no transition without gas. So there are a lot of opportunities. There are also a lot of challenges. And overcoming this really is the spirit of this conference. It requires cooperation. Cooperation between the gas value chain, the different actors within the gas value chain, but also cooperation between industry and governments, and also cooperation between the different sectors. And so again, I think this really is the spirit of the conference. It was the spirit of the conference today. I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope you did too. And certainly an exercise that we will be repeating going forward in next year again. So with that, again, to thank all of you, also the audience. Anne-Sophie, where are you? For the great moderation as always, and I think that deserves some applause. And to the speakers, and of course to the teams of GIE, ENTSOG, and Eurogas as well. So thanks a lot, and there will be some networking drinks after this. So very pleased to continue the discussion there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.